Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto become king has harem in high school DxD. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by OtakuMaxSteel and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. Chapter 1. Forward. The atmosphere was tense and somber on the battlefield. People were still in shock. Uzumaki Naruto was not who they thought he was. He was not an idiot or a loudmouth. That was just a facade that fooled everyone, except for one person. Sasuke Uchiha was the only one the blonde hadn't fooled. He had known for a long time that it was all a show. Kakashi Haddock was consumed by anger and hatred as he looked at three people. I don't understand why he reacted like that, Minato said, hugging his wife and daughter. He's ungrateful, Kushina said, still crying. Kakashi's emotions exploded. How could you? Before the Jonin sensei lunged towards Minato Namikaze, time froze. The lightning jutsu in Kakashi's hand remained static. The water droplet stopped in midair. In all elemental countries, everything stopped. Before a great radiance enveloped everything. Ria's Gremory sat behind her desk, looking frustrated. I don't get it, Akeno, she said to her queen and best friend. Ria's is a beautiful young woman with a voluptuous body and blue eyes. She has a plump figure. Her most distinctive feature is her long, red hair, which reaches down to her thighs. Her hair also has loose fringes that cover her forehead and side fringes that frame her face. She was wearing her Kuo Academy uniform, which consisted of a white long-sleeved shirt with a black ribbon, a black off-the-shoulder cape with a matching corset, a magenta skirt with white detailing, and brown dress shoes over white socks. Akeno Himejima was a beautiful teenage girl with long, black hair. She had a figure like her superior, with large breasts, a larger cup than Ria's, a small waist, and wide hips. She wore the same uniform as her president, but her shirt was tighter. Her violet eyes looked at the Redeed, waiting to see what she would do. Why me? Ria's moved a pawn and ate her queen's bishop. Maybe it's fate, Akeno smiled as he moved his rook and ate the Redeed's knight. What if I challenge him to a duel? Ria's moved her bishop again, devouring her friend's rook. That sounds interesting, but remember she has better nobility than us. Her eyes gleamed. Maybe I'll ask my brother for help, she moved her queen, capturing her friends. Checkmate, she leaned back. Akeno's eyes widened and she looked at the board, trying to see a trap. Oh well, she pouted as she lost a chess again. I doubt Lucifer will help. She got a sigh from her friend, who looked up at the ceiling. I don't want to get married like this, especially to Riser, Ria said, tears in her eyes. President before Akeno could say anything, everything went static. All the animals, people, cars, planes, boats, sea, fish and even the wind itself stopped. The tear that fell from Ria's cheek to the ground stayed as a drop. Everything stopped. In hell, it wasn't like that. It was more like a large civilization of demons who lived among themselves with the same social status as humans. The four most powerful beings of the underworld were in a meeting discussing a space-time distortion. They felt an overwhelming amount of power that made them nervous. Beelzebub spoke seriously and professionally. They were dealing with a delicate subject. Only two beings could emit such overwhelming power. Or it could have been Office, Ajuka-chan, Seraphol Leviathan said, watching his friends. He had been sleeping when the pressure was present. Since then, he'd felt nervous. Office never leaves the rift. It's weird that neither of them have left, Ajuka told her, looking serious. Calm down. We don't know for sure yet. Surzich's Lucifer's, formerly Surzich's Gremory, calm voice reassured Mau, who were looking at each other. Albium says the magical barriers protecting Hell are less than 50% effective, said the Mao ruler of the underworld, looking serious. What? Seraphol gasped. Those barriers have magic from all four of us, that's impossible, she said, looking seriously at the red-haired man. I thought so too, but when I checked, it was true, said Surzich's. This is serious. We must do something, said Ajuka, looking at the Mao Lucifer. I'd like to do something, but if it was the DxD or the Infinity Dragon, we can't do anything, said Surzich's, looking at everyone seriously except Falbium, who was asleep. Seraphol was about to speak, but everything froze. What is it, brother? A beautiful blonde woman with blue eyes and angel wings looked worried at her brother. All the features are altered. Only the Great Net and Office can cause it, but no one saw them come out of the rift. Michael, the elder archangel and leader of the angels, paced back and forth in his office. Our brother, the keeper of the barriers of heaven, said they weakened when the power pressure appeared and disappeared, Michael told the blonde. She opened her eyes. It was only for a few seconds, he added. The immense power pressure had only been felt for a few seconds and had disappeared. I know, but those seconds were enough to weaken the barriers, Gabriel, the lead angel said to his sister, who became nervous. What monster could make the sky's strongest barriers crack? She trembled with fear and nervousness. If her father were here, he'd have a solution. We need to meet with the leaders of the other factions, Miguel said calmly. He knew that since the war ended, there was a lot of discontent. Someone could attack at any moment. I will organize everything, Gabriel nodded with concern. He was about to go and call the meeting when everything froze. The black-haired man stood in front of a fireplace, watching the flames and holding a glass of whiskey. I don't mind, as long as it doesn't affect my faction, the man said, taking a sip of his drink. You should take things more seriously, Master Azazel, said a woman with purple hair. I don't need to be too worried as long as my people are safe, replied Azazel. I wouldn't mind if fallen angels faded away, he added, watching the flames reflected in his glass. But it's worrying that level of power vanished and left fallen soldiers in comas, Penemu spoke, remembering how many of the rookie soldiers had fallen into comas. There was a dimensional tear in space-time, but there are two beings above us living in that area, the black-haired man said calmly. Could Big Red or Office have done it? Penemu asked. She didn't know much, but her boss said those two dragons were powerful. It's possible, but it could also have been Amaterasu, who wants revenge on the demons for her lover Nekashu, Azazel said, remembering that Amaterasu, the goddess of the sun, wanted to destroy the demons. The woman was tired. In all the meetings, Amaterasu fought with the Mau. It wasn't him. It could have been the elders. What they didn't count on is that they screwed over the one who can shape the universe, Azazel laughed. I'll check with the other squares to see if there have been any more casualties, Penemu said and turned away. Her boss was sometimes out of his mind, so she slowly backed away from him. But before he could move, everything went still. A bright light followed. The universe is big and has lots of things in it. Sometimes things are the wrong way around. One action can change reality. This can be anything from moving out of the ordinary to an unexpected birth or death. People said that a person's destiny was set from birth, but many defied that. People who changed their lives in a matter of seconds when they realized they had never taken control. Those who defied fate could end in great legends or pathetic deaths. In every universe, galaxy, reality and world, there was always someone like that. The room was like a small cinema with seats on either side. It was small enough to hold only a few people. In front of the seats was a large screen. The pedestal with weapons, chains and a fox stood in front of it. On the fox's back was a small stand of pure gold that glittered. But the book was the most striking item. It had a gold frame with a design of tangled chains. Inside was a figure covered in a golden glow with weapons and bodies lying at his feet. The room was silent until it lit up. Silhouettes appeared in the room. Kakashi was confused by the atmosphere and place. He was even more confused when he didn't feel his Chidori in his hand. Kakashi. Sasuke's voice was heard next to him. They were in the same place as Minato, Kushina, Tsunade and Naruto's sister. Where are we? The Coupler ninja looked around, checking for enemies. Tsunade ordered, alert. They saw people and some with wings appear in front of them. Rias was confused. 1 second she was talking to her queen and the next she was surrounded by angels. Stay there, her brother's voice made her nod. Where are we? Akeno asked. Everyone was wondering the same thing. I don't know, Akeno, but stay alert, the Gremory heiress ordered her queen. Who are you and why are we here? Michael asked calmly, but his face showed he was serious. We want to know too, Tsunade said, looking at the beings. They looked normal, but the blonde pair had wings and the others didn't, so it must be normal for them. Surfall, Surzicha spoke to the Leviathan, who nodded. The girl tightened her grip on her staff and an icy mist gushed out. Kakashi. The slug Sanin nodded and began to trace seals. Minato, what's wrong? Asked Kushina as she felt pressure in the room. The Yondaime pulled out his special kunai and prepared to throw it. Brother, I don't like this, Gabriel said as the Mayu and his brothers began to create spears of light. I guess there's no other choice, they thought. They didn't know if these people were a threat, so they had to act. He made the light spear solid in his hand and prepared himself. Sasuke watched and wondered what was going on. The other guys were ready to attack and there were more of them than him. He growled and his eyes shone with his Sharingan. The three tomes spun and his eyes took another shape. Susanoo, he muttered, and a dark purple spectrum formed around him. Ribs formed and wrapped around him. Majuka, Surzichas ordered his friend, who nodded and began to conjure a barrier around Rias, Akeno, Gabriel and Penemu. I'd like to talk to you Azazel, but we have something more important right now, the red-haired Lucifer said calmly as a chaotic aura began to manifest around him. Later, the fallen leader shrugged and his power enveloped him. Michael did the same and braced himself. Stop. Don't fight. A voice stopped everyone. They looked back and saw Minato in front of his wife and daughter, who were trembling. A small being hovered in front of a pedestal. It had green hair and pointed ears. She wore a green suit with white trousers and sandals. He was small, but they were surprised that they couldn't feel anything from him. Behind him, they could see a giant wraith made of energy that looked at them all seriously. Bajuka asked, "Who are you?" A small being replied, "I'm Kel." "Are you the one who brought us here?" Tsunade asked, looking at Kel. She knew this little one was dangerous. But she was confused when Kel denied it. "I'm sorry, but I didn't bring you here," Kel told them kindly. He wasn't the one who brought them here. "I'm just a helper, here to guide you," Kel replied. "Guide us?" asked Michael, relaxing. His sister said the little being was good. "That's right, but please sit down so I can explain better," said Kel, offering them seats. Before anyone could say anything, a paper bomb went towards him. "Ah!" Kel closed his eyes as he saw the paper bomb heading towards him. It exploded, engulfing the boy who had been unable to defend himself. "Ah!" The Mayu and the others heard a cry of pain. They looked at the other people in the room and saw the large-breasted blonde subduing the young girl. "You're stupid." Tsunade growled at Minato's daughter, who groaned in pain as Tsunade held her arm. Ashina screamed and was pinned down by the Susanu's skeletal hand. "Calm down," Kel said, and everyone looked at the little one, who emerged from the smoke without a scratch. A few minutes later, everyone was calmer and sat down. Riaz was still nervous next to Akeno, as it had been really intense feeling the pressure of the leaders of Hell and the Fallen. "Please explain," Gabriel said kindly to Kel, who was watching them all. He had kept his powers to avoid any tragedy, as both sides were ready to explode. "Of course, miss," Kel nodded and kept floating. "You've been summoned here to see something interesting," the little man said as the golden book floated beside him. "You believe in interdimensional events," Kel said, seeing some nodding and others denying. "A single event can alter the balance of a world," he added. "The day you were brought here to read something related to that," the little man said. The book floated into Gabriel's arms. "Huh?" she said, looking at the book. She felt that overwhelming sensation again. "The King's Journey?" she read on the cover. "Now you will read about a king's journey," Kel nodded at the blonde angel's words. "And it's based on the life of Uzumaki Naruto." The eyes of the shinobi world widened at this. End prologue. Poem. The atmosphere in the room was tense, with everyone surprised and confused. "Who is Naruto, President?" Akeno asked her king, who was just as confused as she was. When she mentioned that name, everyone else in the room fell completely silent. "I have no idea," Akeno, Riaz said, looking completely unaware of the situation. "Do you know anything, brother?" he asked Surziches, who looked at him and shook his head in the same way as the others. "I've never heard of this Naruto," the red-haired Lucifer said to his sister, who nodded doubtfully. "You look relaxed, Azazel," Michael said to his brother, who was relaxed in his seat with Penemu at his side. "Nothing is at risk. That little guy did something with our powers, so we don't have to fight. From what he told us, everything was frozen in time, so I don't have to worry about work," the fallen one said calmly as he leaned back in his seat. Penemu let out a sigh of exasperation at her boss's attitude, but she didn't mind staying there for a while, as long as she could avoid the lustful cadres and the work she was doing for Azazel. She was happy to stay there and read a simple book. Gabriel had been quiet for a while, reading the book. He had a feeling he'd felt before, but he couldn't remember where. Kel thought, "I hope my sister is having a better time than I am," vaguely remembering his twin sister. "Well," Kel's voice brought everyone out of their thoughts, and they turned to look at him. "My creator has decided to bring in a couple more people," the little creature said, which made them even more curious and doubtful. "Who could it be?" Riaz murmured, asking Akeno. All of this was strange, and even stranger were those people standing next to them, who hadn't yet said their names as they were still cautiously following them. Before they could say anything else, the whole room was illuminated in a bright light. They all felt it. There was a strong sense of murderous intent in the room. It began to overwhelm the three teenage girls in the room. A gorgeous blonde woman started to emerge from the bright light, and it was her who was emitting that killing intent. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice strong and powerful. With the light, she hadn't been able to see who was in front of her, so she wasn't sure if it was an enemy. "Isaka-chan?" Seraphil inquired, trying to adjust her eyesight to see better. That voice sounded quite familiar, so she reflexively asked, "Seraphil?" The murderous intent hadn't diminished, but the woman questioned. The glow was slowly fading, revealing the woman. "Kyuubi?" Kishina muttered under her breath, seeing in disbelief that the woman who had just appeared had 9 tails waving majestically behind her. "Please don't make any rude comments," Kel said kindly to the Konoha members who were still staring at the blonde. "Nice to meet you, Miss Yusaka," Kel spoke kindly, catching the attention of Yusaka who was still confused and on guard. "Who are you?" the blonde asked, looking at the small being. "Sorry for the delay, my name is Kel, your guide," he introduced himself formally as he bowed to the Yokai leader. "Guide?" She looked at him as well as Seraphil, who shrugged her shoulders. "Let me take a moment," Kel said, approaching Yusaka who didn't stop him as he sensed no hostility from the little one. The red-haired man put his hands on the woman's head and slowly shared the information he had already given to the others. As the information came into her mind, the blonde's eyes got wider and tears started to form in her eyes. When Cal had finished sharing all the information with her, he pulled back a bit and looked at her. "Is this real?" Yusaka murmured, looking at him as if she couldn't believe it. A single nod made her heart flutter with excitement and happiness, and her tails curled up more in joy. Cal asked calmly, and the Yakai leader nodded and walked over to a seat away from everyone. "Kakashi, it's not the Kyuubi, is it?" Tsunade muttered to the Jonin sensei, who shook her head. "No, his presence is not as chaotic and hateful as his," Kakashi explained as he relaxed a little more in his seat. After having asked Sasuke to affirm his theory, he could be calmer. The group watched as the woman guided 3 of her tails to the front, where she had a bundle. "A little girl," Kushina muttered under her breath, noting that a blonde girl with tails and fox ears like her could be seen from between the woman's tails. She was sleeping adorably while hugging one of the woman's tails, which Kushina recalled was named Yusaka. "Listen up, everyone," Cal called their attention and they all turned around, curious. "Miss Gabriel will start reading and everything she says will appear on the screen behind me. Does everyone understand?" he asked, looking at them all calmly. Rias and Akeno both tried to speak to some of the elders they were with, but even Ria's brother ignored her to chat with his colleagues and the other 2 leaders about everything that was going on. "Well, Miss Gabriel, if you wouldn't mind," Cal said to the most beautiful angel in the sky. Of course, the blonde archangel replied with the same kindness. She slowly opened the first page of the book and was surprised when the text didn't appear on the pages like any other book. The text didn't appear on the pages like any other book. Instead, it was displayed in golden letters on a hologram that floated a few centimeters above the pages. Without wasting any time, he began to read. There was a great atmosphere of celebration as the shinobi from each village chatted with each other. Some participants were seen showing affection, including giving hugs and displays of emotion. The reason for the celebrations and the emotional responses of the participants was the conclusion of the 4th Shinobi War. "War?" Seraphil asked, her mouth watering, recalling her own factional conflict where they had lost many friends. "It's not that bad," Nami said, convinced that her home wasn't that bad. "Surely, those wars were caused by minor conflicts." "Child, be quiet," Tsunade ordered, giving her a stern look. What would that brat know about the past wars? The blonde boy of about 17 watched the scene unfold. He looked thoughtful, mulling over the circumstances that had led to this situation. Isaka's lip trembled slightly at the sight of the image on the boy's screen. Minato and Kushina looked down again when they saw their son. The conflict that has resulted in the highest number of casualties in history. The conflict started with the actions of a group called Akatsuki. The group was set up during the 3rd Shinobi War. It was made up of a few orphans who came up with the idea of Akatsuki as a way of bringing peace to their home country of Omegakure, which often found itself caught in the crossfire during one of the many conflicts between the 5 great nations. "Just one group caused a world war," Ajuka said, surprised by the new information. "They were just orphans with power." Surziches was curious about the Akatsuki members. "They were just renegade scum," Nami muttered under her breath, earning a sharp glare from Sasuke, who was quite tempted to use Genjutsu on the Yandame's daughter. "Even with all the care of mommy and daddy, you couldn't stand up to one of them," the Uchiha's cold and cutting words made the girl frown. Who did he think he was, belittling her power and her parents like that? That was her thought as she stared at the boy's head, as if trying to pierce his skull. Land of earth. Land of lightning. Land of water. Land of wind. Land of fire. The 5 great nations were known as follows, and each of them housed a shinobi village. "There are 5 great nations," Azazel said, rubbing a bit of his beard as he leaned forward and looked at the other people in the room. "Each one is ruled by a leader," he added, but he didn't know who the leader was in each nation. "Yes, each village has its own chief leader," Tsunade said, relaxing a little more as she noticed that these people were already relaxed and had no intention of doing anything strange. "It's like the factions," Michael muttered, thinking of the similarities. "The Wagakure is the shinobi village in the land of earth. Kurigakure represented the land of water. Kumagakure is in the land of lightning. Sunagakure is the nation belonging to the land of wind. Hanahagakure represents the land of fire." Since the shinobi villages were created, these 5 entities have been trying to maintain a delicate balance of power within the elemental nations. However, it hasn't always been plain sailing. Throughout their existence, the villages have been involved in various conflicts, from minor to major. The most important of these have been called the Shinobi World Wars. The Keno spoke as he listened to what each ninja nation was called, all represented by their own element that he assumed they wielded. "Maybe they're named after the fact that they're close to that element or wielded," Rias said, earning a nod from both Akeno and Penemu, who had approached the 2 younger girls. Azazel had started to ramble, so she decided to get away from him before he started getting paranoid. A megakure, as the name suggests, is a village that is always covered in rain. For a long time, it was protected by the legendary salamander Hanzo, whose prowess in battle was known throughout the elemental nation. He was so powerful that shinobi would flee at the sight of him. Over time, though, he lost his drive and his ambition for a megakure to become a thriving, sun-drenched land faded. He became less committed, stopped developing his skills, and concentrated on maintaining his authority. It's a shame when great warriors lose interest in fighting. Ajuka said, earning a nod from the faction leaders and even Tsunade and Kakashi, who had all seen great and promising warriors become the best, but who were slowly losing interest in their goals. Hanzo was a bit of a bastard, but I have to admit he was powerful, Tsunade said, moving a few seats forward to stand next to them, followed by Kakashi, Sasuke and Namikaze Uzumaki, who although they were silently watching everything, didn't want to be left out of it. Did you fight against him? Serafal asked the blonde with large breasts that almost rivaled Yusaka's. Yes, but I almost died on several occasions, she admitted, remembering how she, Jiraiya and Orochimaru fought against Hanzo and almost died on several occasions. However, it was later when she was approached by Danzo Shimura, a veteran of Konoha who convinced her that the Akatsuki were planning to overthrow him. They subsequently formed an alliance and managed to hold Konan, one of the original members of the Akatsuki, hostage. In exchange for the release of Yahiko, the boy who had initiated and led the Akatsuki, they were willing to negotiate. Yahiko, who was often described as selfless, acted quickly and impaled himself on the kunai that his friend Nagato was holding. He did this to secure his own freedom and avoid burdening Nagato with his death. Furthermore, he placed his trust in Nagato to achieve their shared dream of peace. However, this event also marked the beginning of a new Akatsuki, which had a significant impact on the entire shinobi world. That damned one-eyed man, Tsunade growled in annoyance that Danzo had again got involved in something that was none of his business. Yo, you know he's like that, Lady Tsunade, Kakashi said, remembering his years en route under Danzo, who was actually a damned one-eyed man. He was pretty shocked when he found out that the same orphanage in Konoha was giving children to Danzo to turn them into his personal puppets. He quickly alerted the elderly Lake Cage, who acted immediately by shutting down the orphanage and arresting the woman in charge of the child trafficking. It's a good thing he's no longer around, Sasuke muttered under his breath, recalling how the one-eyed old man had met his end. The Biju. The term chakra monster is also used to describe giant chakra constructs in the form of animals with varying numbers of tails. The Biju were originally created long before the ninja villages were established by the Sage of the Six Paths, who separated the Juubi. The Biju were created not only to stop the Juubi being brought back to life, but also to help maintain peace and balance. However, over time, people didn't see these beings as having a mind of their own. They were seen as demons and beasts and were feared. Later, they were hunted because people were greedy and saw how powerful they were and wanted it for themselves. That sounds quite familiar, Michael said, trying to remember where he'd heard similar terms and deductions. Because it's the same thing that happened with the celestial dragons, Azazel said with his best poker face, looking at his pure brother, who was sweating a little. That's right, the angel leader said, scratching his cheek. He remembered that they all thought the same thing about the celestial dragons, who spent all their time in their eternal fight, wreaking havoc wherever they went. Dragons. This time, Minato was focused on the other people in the room, listening to their conversation. Later on, Hashirama Senju, the Shodaime Hokage of one of the first ninja villages, managed to capture them. Unfortunately, Hashirama didn't quite see it coming. He captured the Biju against their will and distributed them to other villages. The other nations soon sought to incorporate these creatures into their own arsenals. Unlike Hashirama, who was able to calm them with his Mokuton, a Kekkei Genkai originating from the Senju clan. So they started looking for other ways to use the power of the Biju. This meant sealing the Biju inside a human, which is what we now call a Jinchuriki. Riaz was amazed as the screen showed a straight black-haired man in red armor, fighting and containing large monsters of varying sizes and appearances. She could feel the great power radiating from each of them. Isaka nodded, acknowledging the man's strength. She could feel that for each beast he contained, their level of power was very different. The level of tails they had behind them ranged from one to the most powerful, which was the nine-tailed one. And she was well aware of that. Yes, but it was a bit of a naive act, looking for peace but causing conflict. Serafal sighed wearily, realizing that the man's noble and well-intentioned act had actually led to more conflict and possibly even the deaths of innocent people. That's just how the world works. Don't do good things that seem bad, and don't do bad things that seem good, Azazel said calmly, analyzing everything. And at his words everyone nodded along with Tsunade, who knew her grandfather had made a big mistake and that he had unintentionally been the reason the Jinchuriki were created. Konoha also had to think about the possibility of attacks from other villages. Madara Uchiha, the well-known leader of the Uchiha clan, had set up Konohagakure with his rival, Hashirama. Although the venture was successful at first, it couldn't be sustained in the long term. With Hashirama appointed Hokage, the leader of the village, Madara began to worry about the future of the Uchiha clan. Gabriel paused for a moment and let out a sigh, his mind drifting to his brother Lucifer, who had turned against their father for similar reasons. "It'll be okay, sis," Michael reassured his little sister, who simply let out another sigh and continued reading. Things got worse when Madara deciphered the stone tablet he'd had for generations. It showed not only the history of the shinobi, but also how the conflict had been going on for generations and how there had been failed peace between the Senju and Uchiha clans. It also outlined a possible solution to the clan struggle. Mugen Tsukiyomi. Given this new information, Madara started to pull away from the village and lost confidence in his own clan and in Konoha. He left before coming back to Konoha to challenge Hashirama, but he wasn't on his own. With his Sharingan, he managed to subdue the Kyuubi no Kitsune, the most powerful of the Biju. They fought each other to the point of exhaustion, but even Madara, along with the Kyuubi, couldn't prevail against Hashirama, who, with much sadness, was forced to kill his childhood friend. The area where they fought would later be called the Valley of the End. "It's your clan's fault. All this is your fault." Nami shouted angrily, pointing at the last living Uchiha, who just looked at her disinterestedly. "Don't blame everyone else, brat," he said, directing his murderous intent towards her, which made her swallow dryly. He was more intent on killing than his father or mother, from what he had heard from the combatants in the war. He was almost on par with his brother in what he had let himself be seen since he had arrived on the battlefield. "Come on, Sasuke. We can't get hysterical with people like that," Kakashi said calmly as he placed a hand on the shoulder of his wayward student, who only grunted under his breath and continued to watch the screen. The two of them interacting made the faction leaders take notice of the boy, who was said to be from the same clan as this Madara. "They were pretty strong," Riaz said, watching the screen show bits of the fight between the two men and the damage they did in one attack. "They can use lightning and fire," Akeno said, looking a bit surprised as he watched them both use lightning and fire attacks. "And they're pretty strong," Penemu nodded in agreement at the level of destruction they both caused with a single attack. However, Madara managed to survive. Madara had planned to use Izanagi, a Uchiha Kenjutsu technique, to rewrite reality. The result was the loss of his right eye and a period of seclusion. He obtained a sample of Hashirama's DNA and implanted it. By combining his Uchiha DNA with Hashirama's Senju DNA, he was able to awaken the legendary Rinnegan. This would further his plans for a world of peace. Allah. Ajuka and Azazel were really interested in how Madara had escaped death. Azazel said to the black-haired boy, "Your family has some pretty weird techniques." The Uchiha seemed to understand, even though it was a bit strange. He remembered Idich Plus telling him about some jutsu that could help him in the future. One of them was the one Madara used to avoid dying. Tobi was actually the leader of Akatsuki, but this was a secret between Konan and Nagato. He seemed a bit foolish during meetings with other Akatsuki members, but he showed his full capability during meetings with Nagato and Konan. He used the guise of Madara Uchiha, who was later revealed to be his mentor, to manipulate them by exploiting their fear of facing the legendary shinobi himself. He then interrupted the cage meeting, introducing himself as Uchiha Madara. He then went on to explain the details of his strategic plan, which was called Mugen Tsukiyomi. The final Genjutsu would project an image onto the moon, making people feel like their deepest desires were coming true. This could help reunite children with their parents, as well as other things. He made a final offer. To give up the Kyuubi and the Hachibi. This was rejected, which led to the Fourth Shinobi World War. He plays with their minds and uses the appearance and name of someone renowned and feared to hold powerful and dangerous subjects in the palm of his hand on their own merit. Ajuka nodded his head in not approval, but, rather, in some respect at the strategy the man used. "They're war strategies, and unfortunately, we fell for them," Tsunade muttered, recalling the devastation wrought by the deadliest war in the elemental nations. "Is that a Kyuubi, Yasaka-chan?" Seraphil asked her Yakai colleague, curious to know more after hearing that they had one in that location. "No, we might be different," the blonde replied calmly, though she was sweating a little internally. "That one could easily overpower me," she thought, feeling a cold sweat break out on her forehead. However, they were surprised when, during the final moments of the war, the masked man revealed himself to be Uchiha Obito. This was because he had been forced to reveal his identity following the news that the real Madara Uchiha had been revived using Ito Tensei. Obito Minato muttered under his breath, realizing that his student had ended up in this situation due to his own mistakes and slow response time. "That technique," his Azazel's eyes twinkled as he watched the real Madara come back to life. "Dangerous," Michael frowned. Who could be so crazy as to create a technique that would disturb the eternal rest of a body and soul? Tsunade got a chill as she thought she heard someone cursing her family. She figured it was true since Senku was never wrong. Ajuka thought to herself, I wonder if I could create something like that. She had noticed a while ago that her friend, who always slept, was not here with them. She figured he had been left sleeping in the boardroom. He just kept scheming and thinking under his breath as he listened to Gabriel read and watched the screen. However, the surprise wasn't just limited to those mentioned above, as the Yondaime Hokage was also seen hugging a red-haired woman and a blonde girl who was a little bit younger. The Redeed was identified as his mother, Kushina Uzumaki, while the blonde girl was confirmed to be his sister, Nami Uzumaki Namikaze. So you're connected to this Naruto character, Riaz said, turning to the three of them who were still watching silently. Yeah, he's my older brother, Nami said, sounding annoyed and angry when he mentioned it. I see, the red-haired Gremory nodded, turning her eyes towards the screen to continue watching. They weren't very interesting, so she decided to leave them for the time being. The appearance of Namikaze Minato came as a surprise to all members of the alliance. The incident in question began when a small group of shinobi came across a small house in the forest near the river country. The scene was one of devastation, with over 100 white Zetsu corpses strewn around the house. However, the most surprising thing was that there were 3-pronged kunai scattered around the area. They immediately let HQ know, which made them worry that someone might know about the Hiraishin no Jutsu. But these concerns didn't come true when Uchiha Sasuke, a missing ninja, arrived with a yellow flash. This showed the Namikaze Uzumaki family, except for Naruto. Sasuke knew they were his family because he'd found them inside his seal. Were they hidden? Akeno asked, intrigued. It was strange to him that someone as important as they were would hide like rats. Not quite, Minato replied, trying not to damage his reputation any further. His wife was still coming to terms with their son's departure and was now quieter than usual as she watched the whole thing. The story itself will explain it, Kel said calmly, which made the Redeed nod with genuine curiosity. While most of the shinobi were happy to see them, some of the Konoha even showed a negative reaction. One of them was Hada Kakashi, who was placed under their command along with Obito and Rin when they became genin. He looked really angry, as if he was trying to hide it, and stared at someone whom everyone believed to be deceased. His sensei, the one who taught him the importance of valuing his colleagues. The man who gave him guidance and support when his father passed away was still alive and had neglected his son. His own flesh and blood. Minato had the courage to greet him as if nothing had happened. The hostile atmosphere Kakashi was giving off was enough to make even him take a step back. They abandoned their own son. Why would they be so cruel? Gabriel, who had read a few more lines of the book, looked up at the Namikaze family with surprise. Their cruelty was reminiscent of the words his brother Lucifer had said to him before he fell. Humans are selfish and only look out for themselves and never for others. They seek their own benefit and that will lead them to destruction one day. Those were the words his brother said to him for the last time before he fell from the sky. And now she could see that there was some truth in what he said after reading a few more paragraphs of the book. We didn't intend for this to happen, Kushina said sadly, realizing the seriousness of her actions. Nami and Minato tried to comfort their mother, but neither of them noticed the look of annoyance Yusaka gave them from the corner of her eye. All the Hokages who had returned with the Ito Tensei looked at him in shock. Even the Sandaime Hokage, who had appointed Minato to the position, was disappointed with the actions of his successor. While Hashirama could only shake his head, commenting that Mito would be disappointed if she looked at Kushina now. Tsunade shook her head. She knew that one of the rules and beliefs of her grandmother as well as the Uzumaki clan was that family comes first, no matter what. Mito Uzumaki was one of the strongest believers of that. That's why she knew her grandmother would be really upset to see one of her own family members abandon her own son. Riaz told his brother, who nodded in agreement. It was common knowledge in the underworld that the Gremory matriarch was a devout believer who put her family first. And she proved that when she ruthlessly disintegrated a lower-ranking Gremory devil who abused his wife and daughter. From then on, everyone knew that the kind and generous Benalana Gremory could be scary. Kakashi and the others watched Naruto's reaction to seeing his presumed deceased family members safe and sound. It was a stark contrast to the circumstances of Naruto's younger years when he was struggling to survive. They were surprised by his lack of response. Naruto usually spoke a lot about his actions, but in this case he was unusually reserved. His expressionless attitude was even more worrying, as it was unusual for him to be so aloof. What a shame, he commented, noting the jubilant shinobi around him. How cold, Azazel laughed at the boy's reaction and words. He thought the boy was going to run off like a small child to his dead parents, but no, and that made him interested in the boy. He's powerful, Michael said, looking at the blonde boy calmly. His posture, bearing, aura, battle wounds, and look all showed and exuded the great confidence the young man had in himself and his abilities. This feeling was strangely familiar. His heart, Gabriel said after feeling the boy's heart for a moment. It was strange, but he could do it. And he felt it, cold. What is it, sister? Michael was a little worried as he saw a tear trickle down his sister's cheek. Her heart doesn't show any happiness or other emotions that you'd expect from someone seeing their family, he said. The family heard this and felt a tightening in their hearts. So he didn't feel anything, huh? Minato muttered under his breath, feeling sick inside. He and his wife knew it was completely their fault. His words, though he was speaking to himself, seemed to carry across the clearing. One by one, the shinobi stopped celebrating and turned to look in his direction. He surveyed the scene, observing the expressions of his own, who were unable to maintain eye contact. His blue eyes, which had once conveyed a sense of vitality, now seemed dull as he watched them, further accentuating the impassive expression on his face. "Is it so bad that you can't even look me in the eye, Namikaze Minato?" he asked. Isaka said, her voice more venomous than she would have liked. "I agree," Surziches nodded like most faction leaders. Nami was about to say something, but Kushina's hand on her shoulder made her turn her gaze towards her and saw her shake her head. So she grumbled under her breath and sat back to continue watching her ungrateful older brother. When he spoke, the man looked up and his eyes showed guilt. "Naruto. No matter what you feel, whether it's guilt, sadness, regret or anything else, your sin for leaving your son behind will never be forgiven." Gabriel repeated the same words her father said to her before he died, whenever she saw a man abandon his family or leave his young children on the street. She often looked out at the human world or even descended to walk among them and could only notice a mess of emotions. Hate, sadness, regret, pain, ambition, and selfishness were the main emotions that dominated her father's beloved creations. All those emotions made her feel sick to her stomach. She was the purest female angel child of God, but sometimes she wondered whether her father did the right thing in creating mankind and whether her brother Lucifer was right to turn against God. "Yes, that's my name." His voice was still disinterested as he kept looking around. He saw Kakashi, who seemed to be having trouble deciding whether to glare at Minato or look at him with concern. His gaze met the rest of the rookies, who were all looking at him with concern, except for Sasuke, who seemed to be waiting for something. Azazel laughed hysterically again, clapping his hands like a madman as he watched the boy destroy his parents with his sentimental and mental abuse. "You're wrong," Penemu said, shaking her head. She was pleased with the boy's treatment of her parents, but not as pleased as her boss, who seemed amused by the suffering of others. "Oh, he's aware of that." Their eyes met for a moment and Naruto seemed to show a hint of confidence before it disappeared. If it had been anyone else, Sasuke would have thought he was mistaken, but with his Sharingan active, he could see the grimace and tell that, even though he seemed bored, there was more to it. It was as if he was waiting for something. "With all due respect, your presence makes me feel wrong," he said. The other shinobi present looked at him and his father with confusion, as they didn't understand what he meant. "Oh," the former employee said, catching his breath after a fit of laughter and wiping a tear from his eye. "At least he's sincere and respectful." Rias commented to Akeno, who nodded in agreement. The boy was attractive in his own way, but she felt that if those marks on his cheeks went away, he could be much more attractive. In fact, if he could be with her or in this room, she would really give herself a chance to get to know him better. "You're such a pervert," Rias said, looking at her queen, who licked her lips sensually every time she saw the blonde on the screen. "He does look handsome," the Redeed said, staring at the blonde unabashedly. Isaka was irritated by the girl's behavior. Who does she think she is? She thought. Serafal turned around in her seat like a little girl, staring at the red-haired Ichiha. He got an owlish look on his face for a moment as he became the center of the woman's attention. She had a very developed girl's body, according to Kakashi. "I know, but I don't feel like talking," Sasuke said, resuming his indifferent attitude while ignoring the woman's watery eyes. "Not good." Serafal sat back down with her arms folded and her cheeks puffy from not getting what she wanted. With a quick gesture, Naruto's body lit up with a golden glow, which served to refocus the attention of those present on him. When the glow dissipated, everyone was staring at the new form of Naruto Uzumaki, who had his eyes closed. Some shinobi blinked before waving their hands and shouting Kai. It seemed like this was their response to what they were seeing, which they believed was a jinjutsu. "I'm still curious about this jinjutsu," Michael said, turning to the Konoha inhabitants, who seemed reluctant to answer. Kakashi saw no harm in asking, however, if they were going to be there for a while, they should at least try to coexist and get along. Jinjutsu is a technique that can make a person see things that are meant to scare them. They might see their death or they might be tortured, Kakashi explained calmly to the group, who nodded at this new information as it was quite interesting. The Beelzebub nodded, noting that there were some similarities between some of the spells and this jinjutsu. The reason for this was that Naruto's previous outfit, which was made up of tattered orange trousers and a black and orange jacket, was no longer visible. He was wearing a white jacket with a fur collar, which was left open to expose his well-defined chest. This was different from the Raikage, who had bulky muscles. This new outfit fit the rest of his body perfectly. He also wore black jeans held in place by a black belt with a gold buckle. His sandals were replaced by black dress shoes. However, the changes weren't limited to just his clothes. He seemed to have aged slightly, maybe a year or two. He'd also grown, and his previous height of 5'5" had been replaced by his current 5'11". His face, once shaped like Kushina's, was now more angular and resembled that of Minato. The whiskers on her cheeks had disappeared. Her blonde hair retained its color, though it was slightly slicked back. Akeno shot back in her seat with a brief but noticeable gush of nasal mucus. She knew that if the boy dressed better and removed those marks on his cheeks, he would be really attractive, but now he was very attractive. The Gremory heiress queen had swirls in her eyes at the sight of such a man. Her king was no better. She had a noticeable blush on her cheeks as she watched the boy on the screen. She had found him attractive at first, but now that he had a new look, he really was handsome. Enemu seemed disinterested, but Azazel knew her assistant was checking out the blonde. She was the first female angel to fall for lust and seduction. Isaka had a blush on her cheeks and was biting her lower lip lightly. She was also grunting under her breath at the reactions of these kids, even Serapho, who had a strange obsession with her younger sister, was showing a blush. "Naruto, is that you?" stammered Minato, surprised by his estranged son's transformation. He opened his eyes and was again surprised by the change in appearance. His once blue eyes were now red. Minato felt compelled to shudder as those eyes seemed to look straight into his soul. His wife and daughter, standing beside him, also felt the same. It was as if they were the prey and he was the predator, with the way his eyes looked at them. Gabriel shuddered a little. She'd never seen eyes like that before. She felt like her soul was being judged by those sharp eyes. Not even her own father had ever had eyes like that. They were judging and penetrating, and they made her shudder. Minato, Kushina and Nami shuddered again as they remembered the chilling sensation their son and brother produced. The atmosphere around their son had also changed. It used to feel cold and unwelcoming, but now it was distinctively cold and authoritative. As she watched him, she felt the urge to submit. "It's a feeling," Michael said quietly, recognizing the presence this boy exuded. It was the same one that appeared and disappeared, the same one that created that tear in space-time. But how could that be possible? The angel leader muttered under his breath. It was impossible because they were totally different worlds. Creating a rip in space-time required much more than great power. And if he'd managed it with any technique, Big Red or the Infinity Dragon would have destroyed him for breaking into their home. So how could this sensation be the same as the one that appeared in his world? Then it clicked. The King's Journey, the name of the story they were watching, suddenly made sense. Of course it does. Is a half-breed like you incapable of recognizing his own flesh and blood? Her voice contained a certain arrogance as she mocked him. Then again, it wouldn't be surprising. Minato shuddered as her words had a big impact on him. He was curious about what had prompted his son's behavior, but decided to focus on the matter at hand. "Son, what happened to you?" "Whatever happened to him, I'm grateful that it happened to him," Akeno said, pointing at the screen with a goofy yet sensual smile on her lips, which made those around her sweat. "Akeno, please control yourself," Rias told her queen, though the blush on her cheeks still lingered. If she was honest, she could agree with her friend. Whatever happened to Naruto's appearance, it was too good. On the other hand, his tone is quite different, Surzicha said, ignoring her sister's enthusiastic colleague for the moment and focusing her attention on the boy's new appearance and attitude. He became more arrogant and full of himself, Azazel finished her words, making him nod. Ajuka looked at Kel, who nodded, confirming that he would explain himself. They nodded in agreement and continued to watch and listen to Gabriel. "You want to know what's going on? I'm not sure if I should tell you," along with the rest of the team. The shinobi next to me seemed a bit agitated and was about to say something before I looked at him, stopping him from commenting. "I have a chance to brief you all." He looked at his wrist but didn't see anything. He snapped his fingers again and a watch appeared in his hand. He looked at it and said, "Soon." Then, the air behind him was tinged with gold. The shinobi around him raised their guard, ready for whatever was about to happen as it began to ripple. In the ancient world, when all the gods existed in peace, there was a single human who defied the gods of his pantheon and slaughtered them. He died in the process, but he annihilated all the gods of ancient Babylon. But that's not possible because he died many years ago. The shinobi around him were surprised when a strange flying object appeared out of the water. It was made of pure gold and had green wings, and it could move around on its own without being controlled from outside. As it came down, the person sitting on the throne put his head in his hand. "That's not possible," Michael said, noticing the ripples in the air behind the boy. He remembered a time when his younger self saw a blonde-haired man in golden armor defeat entire armies without lifting a finger. In ancient times, there was a man who defied all that existed and was yet to exist. He was the great half-god, half-human king born of the union between the king of Uruk, Lugalbanda, and the goddess Remit Ninsun. He ruled the Sumerian city-state of Uruk, which was the capital of ancient Mesopotamia. He was a supreme and transcendent being, so divine as to be two-thirds god and one-third human, and with no one in the world who could match him. He was a despot who possessed a great divinity that he himself considered invincible. This is not just a legend. It's said that he really existed during the Sumerian dynasty 5,000 years ago. He's just like the king of heroes, he muttered under his breath, a cold sweat running down his cheek. He was remembering the story his father told him when he asked who this man was. Now he saw this, he could say with certainty that this man was far more dangerous than he was trying to make himself out to be. His words, though barely audible, reached the ears of Azazel and Serziches, who were in closest proximity to the angel. They watched with interest, though their reactions varied. Serziches was curious, well, Michael was older and therefore likely to know more. But he recalled hearing about a great king, the first great hero. Azazel was amused. This boy was really entertaining him. From the beginning, the boy's aura was familiar to him. But when he changed his appearance and his aura changed completely, he knew immediately that he was the one who had caused such an abnormal phenomenon in the world. And now, his little brother was proving that this boy was the spitting image of the ancient king of Uruk. And that only made it all the more amusing. "I hope you're impressed," he said, watching their expressions with interest from his elevated position. "It's a remarkable machine." He allowed himself a brief amused smile as he settled back on the throne. "Would you like to know how this artifact and I came to be?" he asked the artifact he was sitting on. Minato gave a nod. "I'm still amazed by that contraption," Kakashi muttered, looking at the flying object where his former student was sitting in more detail. "It's curious," Tsunade nodded her head, also quite curious. But she was also thinking about everything Naruto had told them before, which is why they hadn't been chatting much. This was just a review of everything he had told them and shown them. "I think it would be helpful to explain what happened, even though I know it's a bit complicated." He ignored their disapproving looks. "It was several years ago now, when we were sent on a mission to find Uchiha Sasuke, who had hurt me quite badly." He carried on telling them what had happened, ignoring the shocked expressions of his mother and sister. "I remember the event really clearly." "That's interesting. I guess we'll find out what happened then?" Ajuka asked, looking at Kel. Who nodded. He already knew what happened in this whole episode, but he couldn't give any spoilers. Otherwise his sister would somehow find out and give him a hard time. "It'd be great to see it from his point of view," Kakashi said to his team, who nodded in agreement. They were curious to see the big change the blonde had undergone from his perspective. Flashback. His blue eyes widened as he looked at the plain ceiling of the room he had been directed to. Naruto thought, how did I end up here? Then he remembered what had led him to this point. They were called to the Hokage's office, where they were told that Sasuke, their colleague and partner, had left the village to look for Orochimaru. "Orochimaru?" Seraphil inquired, and for some strange reason the name sent a shiver down his spine. "He's a former classmate of mine who became a renegade, he's also an unhinged sicko," Tsunade said the last in a slight growl, as she remembered how the snake Sannin experimented on small children or newborns. "And why were you looking for this Orochimaru?" The Leviathan inquired of the Uchiha, who snorted slightly and didn't answer, causing the Magu to pout slightly. "He's just like any other young man, hungry for everything and wanting to get everything easily," Ajuka nodded, coming to this conclusion from Kakashi, who nodded, as Sasuke's method of becoming strong really did seem low even for a shinobi. His team included Neji, Kiba, Shikamaru, Choji and himself. As they advanced, they encountered the Sound 4, Orochimaru's elite bodyguards who could use the curse mark. As they drew closer, the number of individuals traveling with them dwindled, and one of them was left behind to engage in combat with one of the Sound 4. Lee arrived just in time to deal with the Kagaya limb, leaving him on his own in front of Sasuke. They were pretty evenly matched in terms of power throughout their confrontation. However, that changed when Sasuke deployed the curse seal, which forced him to use the Kyuubi's formidable abilities. The rest of the encounter is somewhat confusing, as he was unable to remember all the details due to his reliance on his tenant's abilities. Riaz asked, eyes wide, turning to look at Sasuke. She wasn't surprised that the boy was gone and they had to go after him. It was actually because of what was on the screen at that moment, showing the younger blonde boy and the younger black-haired boy fighting. There was nothing particularly unusual about two kids fighting like that. But this fight was anything but normal. It seemed like these two were trying to kill each other with every attack, judging by the big explosions that were shown on the screen every time they hit each other. "These kids are not normal," Penemu muttered, watching in awe as the two younger boys fought to dominate the duel. Neither was giving in. Kakashi, Tsunade, Minato, Kushina and Nami, who hadn't seen this, were impressed on how both younger genin fought on such a high scale. Azazel leaned back in his seat, sighing after watching the fight. It wasn't boring, but he was bothered that the blonde boy was holding back. He didn't say anything more, though, and kept listening to Gabriel and the screen. Isaka just watched everything with interest as she stroked the hair and ears of the little girl in her lap, who was still asleep. The last thing he remembered was Sasuke's hand on his chest. He felt anxious and opened his jacket, but there was nothing there. This is rather unusual. Oh, damn, Ria said, watching the black-haired boy's lightning-filled hand pierce the blonde's body after that clash of attacks. I wonder if I can recreate something like that with my magic. Akeno tilted his head, curious about the possibility, as the lightning danced furiously and screeched like a great thousand bellowing birds. At his words, Rias turned pale and began to sweat a little. Akeno was a sadomasochist who loved pain and watching the pain of others. Now she was imagining her with something like what the boy did against Naruto, which made her sweat nervously and pray to Lucifer that his queen wouldn't do something like that. The shinobi also heard the girl's words, and Tsunade muttered, "Magic," under her breath. Kakashi's interest grew when he learned there was another lightning supporter in this place. He wondered if he could talk to the girl about it. He went to the spot he thought was probably where the Biju was. Even without a sensor, it was obvious that the beast was sending out bad vibes. "This is your responsibility." "I'm not sure I understand. Could you clarify which of us is to blame?" replied Naruto, looking a little annoyed as he stared at the towering beast. "Let's keep it down. The problem was that you weren't careful and the Uchiha kid punched you in the chest. I just need to check if that's really the case." Oh my god," Gabriel gasped in horror as he put down the book, which remained floating. "What's wrong?" Michael quickly stepped in front of his sister, who looked him in the eye, and the older angel could see the tears building up in her wide-open eyes. "He's just hate and destruction, much more than Lucifer," she stuttered, her voice filled with fear. In her life, she had never felt a soul as horrifying as that of the great fox, no, as that of that great beast of destruction. Michael's eyes widened after hearing that. His sister had never been so upset and hysterical since she felt the corrupted soul of her brother Lucifer, but now she was trembling and refusing to read any further. Tsunade approached them to see if she could help in any way. "She's just a little upset, that's all," Michael replied kindly, noticing no ill intentions on the woman's part. "Miss Gabriel isn't ready to carry on reading just now, but there's no need for that. I've liked them enough to put the book on read only so everyone can see it straight away," Kel told them, sighing. He wished his sister was there to say something better, but she was working as well. He let out a sigh and set the book to the screen, where it began playing like a movie with no more pauses or short sections. If he hadn't been dying, he would have had to think again about his position. Of course it was real. "You're facing death because of your mistake, and when you die I'll die too, so how about we make a deal?" the fox asked. "What kind of deal?" "I think a deal would be a good idea for both of us. In exchange for your freedom, I'll help get the Uchiha to Konoha. With you going to disappear soon, it's a win-win. I'm not sure I can trust you. From the start, you've been trying to take over my body." He pointed at the huge kitsune. "Chakra supplies alone are not to be trusted," Nami nodded with what seemed to be affirmation. If looks could kill, Sasuke would have already given her countless times instead. Since Naruto had left, she had been able to think seriously about the Biju's existence and why the blonde seemed to trust them more than the humans themselves. And when the sage visited them, he finally understood why. He wasn't about to let them besmirch the name or acquaintances of the one he may have considered his only rival and friend. "Young man, why would I lie now that you're already in a vulnerable position? I'm surprised you're not as upset as I thought you were. But I give you my word that I will save your Uchiha friend from Orochimaru." Naruto stayed silent, looking at his hands. "I'm really dying, huh? I guess I'll be able to free you then, if you promise to save Sasuke." The fox nodded and watched with a smile as Naruto reached for the seal. Freedom was so close he could almost taste it. However, just before he could touch it, he was forced to his knees as an oppressive feeling overwhelmed him. He could barely lift his head and what he saw surprised him. What? Rias could only manage to stammer those words. She was completely rooted to her seat, her nails buried in the armrests. Akeno and Penemu were in the same situation, each on their sides and completely immobile in their seats. Their eyes were wide open, either from fear or the feeling of great oppression that fell over them all in a matter of seconds. The faction leaders were better off, but in the same way, out of pure instinct, they began to release their own power to try to counteract the oppression that was flooding the room. Hell was in a small protective bubble from all this. He'd let them release their auras so they wouldn't be crushed to death. If that pressure brought a being that could destroy mountains with a flick of its tail to its knees, he didn't want to imagine what it would do to these beings, who were on the same level or lower than the Kyuubi. To be honest, his creator wasn't paying him with enough chocolates to wipe a bloody pulp off the floor. A substantial fox before him, the Kyuubi, was forced into a supine position on the ground as silver chains constricted his limbs. From his vantage point, Naruto could see an unfamiliar energy emanating from those chains, which also seemed to affect the Kyuubi, who became visibly restless. "It's not possible for you to be here. What are you doing here?" the Kyuubi asked, sounding really uneasy. Naruto heard footsteps behind him but couldn't look around because of the overwhelming atmosphere. "I see you're still conscious. I imagine you have something to show for it, given your lineage. You are a descendant of Gilgamesh, the king of heroes." "I had hoped so." The male voice spoke with a hint of arrogance. Those words stopped the two older faction leaders in their tracks. "Why your descendant?" Michael gasped in disbelief, a hint of fear in his eyes. He had suspected as much from the moment the boy changed his appearance, but now it was more than clear. Azazel kept releasing his own aura to avoid being crushed to death while laughing. This guy was more than interesting. He seemed like the kind of person you'd want to meet. Maybe he'd even offer him a drink and a chat. Or perhaps even a high-ranking position in their ranks. Who knows? At that moment, he extended his aura further along with the other three to protect the younger women who were shivering in their places. The heavy atmosphere lifted and Naruto turned to face the speaker. He was a young man, probably in his early 20s, with long blonde hair, darker than his own, slicked back. He wore golden armor that exuded strength and power. "I need to know who you are," Naruto said, looking at the man in awe. "You will address me with respect, young man. You may be my descendant, but unless you have proven your worth, you will address me as you would someone of a higher status," he told the boy firmly. "He demands only respect and devotion," Penemu murmured, looking at the one known as the King of Heroes. "It has been too long since I have felt such overwhelming oppression." The angel leader wiped some sweat from his brow as he watched a blonde man in armor on the screen. "So this is Gilgamesh, huh?" Sasuke said as he looked at the man in detail. He looked too much like Naruto, which made sense given that he was his descendant. They were almost a copy of each other, or at least the current Naruto. Kushina was furious at the man who had made her son leave her arms. However, she was a little surprised by how intense the boy's gaze was. "Respect. I only give respect to those who have shown they deserve it, and I don't know what you've done to prove your worth, so I can't agree. Respect is something you have to earn, not just give away." Once he'd finished his impassioned speech, the oppressive atmosphere that had preceded it returned, intensifying as the man lay sprawled on the ground. Behind him, the air stirred as an arsenal of weapons materialized. Spears, swords and axes. Instead of closing his eyes and accepting his fate, Naruto stared at the older man. He was surprised to hear him laugh as the weapons gradually withdrew and the waves closed on their own, a smirk on his face. "Ha ha ha ha, that kid's got them good, look at you saying that to someone who can kill you in seconds." Azazel laughed out loud as he saw the look of defiance and determination on the boy's face. "That brat," Tsunade said, her lips curled into a smile. She had always enjoyed watching Naruto challenge the authority of those with more power, whether politically or otherwise. The others nodded in agreement with the fallen man, who was still laughing. The boy had the courage to challenge such a powerful figure as Gilgamesh, who was said to be remorselessly harsh towards those who disrespected him. "I have to say, you've got a lot of nerve showing up here like this. But I'll give you a heads up. I'm going to tell you who I am, who you are, and what's going to happen next." As he spoke, a golden throne appeared behind him. He then went on to tell his story, which detailed the exploits of a monarch so illustrious that he ascended to the throne of the heroes themselves. So it was true, he'd ascended to the throne of the heroes. Michael finally got over his doubt about whether the ancient king of Uruk had ever been to such a place. "I've heard that King Arthur was there too, right?" Surziches asked them both. They were the most experienced in the group, so they had the information he lacked. Azazel told him that he didn't remember much about the King of Camelot and that he never really cared about his ascension to the throne of heroes. Michael nodded along with his sister, but it was strange for them. They couldn't remember a specific face or body of King Arthur, and their memories of him seemed distorted. Then flashback. That's the gist of it. He wrapped up his explanation. "I have to ask, then, if this Gilgamesh is your ancestor, which would make him also my ancestor." He got a nod in reply. "I have to admit I've never heard of him or it." He pointed to the flying contraption he was sitting on. Naruto shrugged. "I don't know the details, but they don't concern me. That's how it works. It does explain my rather fortuitous circumstances, though." He muttered to himself, remembering Gilgamesh's own golden rule, according to which he was destined to live a life full of riches. He would also clarify that he's a genius during combat, as he unknowingly used thought acceleration whenever he fought. "So that's why," Sasuke said, frowning. "He might be a born genius, with natural talent and little effort, and could accomplish almost anything, but there was one thing he always envied about his former teammate. And that was his ability to think on his feet and come up with strategies and alternate routes in his fights against Gaara. He solved everything quickly when he hadn't been able to yet, with Orochimaru's seal. When he was on his first mission against Zabuzu, he would never have thought of disguising the boy as a shuriken to spare. That was the blonde's idea. When he was on one of his missions, the blonde Uzumaki always found a way to get things done faster and more effectively. That was something he always did well, and that's what she envied about him. Kakashi nodded in agreement with the Uchiha. Naruto had always impressed him with his ability to quickly assess a situation and find a way to either defeat or neutralize the target. If only he hadn't listened to the council's threats when he took them on as students, he could have made the most of all his former students' potential. Just a moment, Tsunade interrupted, prompting him to turn his attention back to her. "Yes, ma'am," Naruto replied, sounding a little annoyed. "If your account is accurate, why didn't Jiraiya notice the change in your attitude? He would have noticed, especially given your age." She looked him up and down. Maybe if he hadn't been otherwise engaged, he would have noticed. But then it would have been too late. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand. Could you explain what you mean?" "The reason for my apparent age is due to certain circumstances. My ancestor, Gilgamesh, was not originally from this area. He informed me of this, how shall I put it?" "Ours," Riaz muttered, taken aback. He'd never imagined the King of Heroes had visited another world, but now, with Naruto's words, he could see that such journeys were entirely possible. Ijuka commented, "It's interesting to note that the object has impressive technology at first glance." The Beelzebub proceeded to analyze the floating ship. "Given the technology, I'd even go as far as to say it's from the future." That information shocked everyone. It was difficult to comprehend how they could follow something that came from a time they didn't even know was defined as the future. "I understand you have some concerns about what I've told you, but that's fine. Anyway, after spending some time with this person, I realized that this so-called training trip was going to be a complete waste of time. I came up with a plan. I created a clone and added a few enhancement seals to strengthen it, making sure it also had a large amount of Biju chakra. Once I'd done that, I made sure the clone had the same personality as me, as it would look odd if it had undergone such a drastic change. I then waited for the man to pass out, which didn't take long. Once he'd passed out, I switched places with the clone that had been following us for a few days and left." Plop. 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 The room filled with applause. When they turned their attention back to the meeting, they saw Azazel, Ijuka, Surziches, and Serafal, all four of them applauding with looks on their faces that showed they respected the boy for what he had just done. Azazel said with a decent amount of respect in his voice, the plan itself wasn't very complicated, but it really didn't have a chance of failing. Ijuka complimented him in the same way, which was very rare for him, but he did it every time he met someone deserving of such praise. Kakashi muttered in disbelief. Tsunade, Minato, Kushina and he knew perfectly well that the late Toad Sannin, despite his flaws, was not an idiot. He gave the impression that he was, but he wasn't, so to hear that Naruto fooled him so easily made them seriously doubt everything. "Once I'd got rid of the guy, I set off on my journey. I was trying to figure out how to get into this world. Before long, I started to remember something. It showed Gilgamesh using this object. He indicated the flying contraption he was sitting on. This flying contraption you see before you is called a Vimana. It's said to be a form of travel used by the gods. I wouldn't call myself a god, even with the influence of Gilgamesh. At least not yet. I saw Gilgamesh enter our world centuries ago with this, which got me thinking. If he was able to enter our world by using it, can I enter his world with it?" He paced the room and watched the audience, who were hanging on his every word. He smiled. Vimana Serafal tasted that name in her mouth, not as such, but the sensation of pronouncing it brought a slight bittersweet taste to her mouth. "I see, so that causes space-time rifts," Ijuka nodded with much curiosity in her tone. Could it be some kind of portal or power release? Or was it something even more incredible, like a maximum speed beyond light and sound? All these questions began to fill the Beelzebub's mind. "I could do it. As the new owner, I'm entitled to access the Vimana, which is one of the vault's most valuable assets. The vehicle can reach speeds that would make even the renowned Yondaime Hokage seem to be moving at a much slower pace. In fact, if I were to use it to its full potential, it could literally cause a tear in space and time," he revealed, surprising them. Minato Namikaze was known throughout the nations as the fastest man, second only to the Yondaime Hokage himself. He was so fast that all that could be seen was a flash of yellow, so they doubted that what he said was true. "Thanks for clearing that up for me," Ijuka said, even though he hadn't meant to. The boy answered the questions he and Azazel had about it, even though he hadn't meant to. "So it's so fast it can cause breakages even in reality itself. How interesting," the fallen man said. He made a mental note to add something similar to his new sacred gear he was creating. "Forgive me for asking, but could you tell me what the vault is?" Riaz inquired, looking a little hesitant. Cal seemed to be thinking about whether or not to answer, but eventually shrugged his shoulders, deciding there was no harm in it. "The vault, or Gate of Babylon. The king's treasure is the golden capital, which is the king's treasure of Gilgamesh and, moreover, the golden key connected to it. It is the storehouse that Gilgamesh built to hold all the treasures of the world that he had collected, known as the Divine Gate. It links reality space to the vault, opening an invisible door that lets the contents pass through when the user wants them to. This makes it easy for Gilgamesh and now Naruto to pick up and use the items in the treasury whenever they want. When the boy explained this, many people were surprised. It was hard to believe that no one had built such a thing before, especially when they were now being told that a single man had done it. It filled them with awe and, in turn, some anguish. "If he comes to our world, I can ask him for help," Ria said to his queen, who nodded in approval. Instead, though, one of Yusaka's tails flicked towards her face, hiding the tears that trickled down her cheeks. She was crying with happiness and longing as she watched the screen. "Daddy will come back to us, my love," she whispered into one of the little girl's ears, who was still sleeping peacefully. "I see you have some doubts. Do you have any?" Before they could blink, the place he had been in was empty. They looked up and saw him chuckling. "Impossible," thought both Namikaze, Minato and the fourth Reikage, who looked at him in astonishment. Even they, who had been trained to drive and to detect insane speeds, were unable to keep up with how fast he was moving. "I hope you're impressed." He slowly returned to where he was before. "You should be." His voice became surprisingly serious. "It's not every day people like you get to see my treasures." Arrogant, but at the same time like any king, benevolent and to a certain degree humble in letting the plebada see his most beautiful treasures. Azazel let out a light laugh. He sounded like one of those who always pitied the balls of their kings to curry favor. "Let's be honest, this Vimana is too fast." "I didn't see a move," Surzicha said, leaning back in his seat. This constant strain had already exhausted him and his neck was killing him. He'd be so grateful if his queen was here and gave him one of those massages that almost broke his neck but left him totally relaxed. "You can't be my son, Neri-chan. I'm Kushina, your mother. I can't accept that you're who you say you are." "And you still have the nerve to tell her that," Akeno shook his head disapprovingly. It would sound hypocritical of her since she did have her father alive and was aware of it, but her situation was far, far different. She steered clear of him for reasons that came before she met Rias. Back then, his beloved mother was killed. Now, she was telling her son that she was his mother after abandoning him all his life. That was really wrong. "I know you have doubts, but I can assure you that I am who I say I am. Your husband knows my identity, as does Sasuke. I'm sure you'll come to accept that in time." "I'm sorry, I got the wrong idea. Could you explain again?" He looked around to see who had spoken. He saw Sakura, a short girl with pink hair, standing nearby. He gave her a quick look before rolling his eyes, remembering his teenage crush on the girl. He was thinking the wrong thing at the time. "Do you remember when we went looking for Sasuke, Sakura? Were you, Sai, Yamato and I there at the time?" She seemed to agree, although she wasn't sure what he was getting at. "Sasuke was there when we met." She looked at the dark-haired boy. "Sasuke agreed to my seal, where he suppressed the Kyuubi. But that wasn't the only thing he found there." He smiled. "You see, he met the real me, not the inexperienced young man with ambitions to become Hokage in a village that did not support him. I have broader aspirations than to remain in a position that offers no chance of advancement." "Those eyes of yours are interesting," Azazel said, looking curiously at Sasuke after seeing on the screen how the boy with the red eyes accessed a space only he could enter. He wished he could analyze them for his father. "I suppose so," the Uchiha nodded calmly, although he was visibly shaking. He didn't know why, but he had the same feeling he had every time Orochimaru looked at him, and it made him cringe. Enemu let out a chuckle, mocking the last Uchiha, who quirked an eyebrow at the woman's clear mockery. "Women obsessed with a man are weak," she said again, this time with disgust in her voice. She'd seen it time and again on the battlefield during wartime. Many women had fallen into disgrace because they'd idolized a fallen angel as a genius. In reality, though, they'd never been anything of the sort. Their lives had been wasted on that, rather than on training to avoid dying as pathetically as those women had done. And she saw that even on other planets and in different careers, there were women like that, and it made her sick. Because weak women make it harder for strong women who can stand up for themselves. She pointed upwards. "Look at the sky and tell me what you see. Is it not typically a sky full of stars?" They nodded in agreement. "This shows the difference between your view and mine. When you look up, you see your limits and flaws. You can observe, but you can't touch beyond what's in front of you. I'm not held back by what others think is impossible. If there's a challenge, I'll find a way to overcome it." He felt the pulse of the watch on his wrist. "It looks like we've gone off topic a bit. Maybe it sounds a bit arrogant, but if Vimana is as he says she is, then what seems impossible to a race or a person to him is only an obstacle he can overcome with little or much effort." Ajuka explained Naruto's words to make them easier to understand for those who are less knowledgeable without offending anyone. But the fact that the boy is powerful also plays a role here. Azazel, who was drinking from a bottle on his side and holding a glass in his right hand, replied calmly. The boy was powerful on his own merit and that was only what he had let them feel. But if that incredible power was his, then they had to be careful. Could you please explain the connection between your advanced age and the remarks you made? Minato asked. Naruto thought about whether he should share this information, but decided it would be helpful to do so. At last, we'll understand why he's made such a big change, Akeno said, smiling playfully and sensually. He wasn't lying. This boy was physically attractive to her from the moment she met him. Perhaps if she showed him more of herself and her true self, she could even feel something for him. She was well aware that his outwardly rough and arrogant demeanor was nothing more than a facade, a mere pretense of being someone he wasn't. This intrigued her even more. Very well, then. So, I was able to cross the space-time continuum with the help of this device. He gave a little nod to show he was happy with the Vimana. I got to the world that Gilgamesh told me about. I should mention that this world is, in comparison, pretty basic. It's almost primitive by comparison. The technology in question is pretty much off the scale in terms of what you've heard of before. Machines that can move things from one place to another really quickly and efficiently. In that society, you shinobi are like rabid animals compared to how things are done there. The ninja era is long over. It's not accurate to still call you ninja. The traditional role of the shinobi is to act in the shadows, which is difficult with the flashy techniques you use. Also, your actions attract a lot of attention when you engage in combat, which isn't good for discreet. Change the subject to steer the conversation back on track. So it is true that I traveled to our world, eh? Azazel took his chin again in deep thought. We'll just have to wait and see if he explains it or not, he said, making everyone a little nervous with his nonchalant attitude. It's interesting that in our world the ninja era is long gone, but in yours it's still so present, Surziches said, addressing the room in general. The ninjas in stories and anime are cool. I wonder if they are too, Ria said to Akeno, who laughed. Their president was a big anime fan. When they were kids, they spent their time in their room watching anime or reading manga from the human world. She had always wondered why so much passion for anime until she met Dragon Ball, and that's when she found out why her king loved anime so much, because it was really good. As it happens, they both had a pair of Goku pajamas that they shared when they had sleepovers or girls' nights out. I believe so, the red-haired girl nodded her head, recalling how Sasuke had summoned that peculiar purple entity. Their strength would be an advantage there, as it's not common practice to use chakra in that society. You can't live without chakra, his sister said simply. Chakra, like in the yokai? Seraphil inquired, tilting her head and looking at Yasaka, who shrugged. Maybe it's different, the yokai leader said, sweating a little. Why do they say that chakra is the only way to live? Gabriel asked the shinobi, curious. Because chakra is essential. If you deplete your chakra completely, you die, Minato replied and went on to describe what he had seen many times in war, where many died from chakra depletion. It's interesting how in our world, it's only about power, not life energy, Yasaka said, sparking the shinobi's curiosity about this world and the different powers they used. Are you assuming I'm lying, sister? He asked, noticing a change in the atmosphere. He wasn't about to let a woman he had just met accuse him of lying, even if she was his sister. Ah. And Naruto, please calm down. Nami didn't mean that, did she, sweetheart? He asked, turning to his daughter, who was visibly surprised by his reaction to her words. She nodded her head slowly, and the air around her seemed to scream danger. Good, keep that dog on a leash, will you? She told her parents as she insulted her. Minato and Kushina stayed silent, not wanting to upset their son further, and stopped Nami from responding to his taunts. Enemu, I like this boy. Azazel chuckled again at how with simple words the blonde had once again shushed his parents and sister. For his part, Enemu only sighed with resignation towards his leader. How do you put up with it? Riaz asked in a whisper. During their time here, the fallen leader's comments and actions had irritated or tired her. She was impressed that Enemu had not struck Azazel. Believe me, girl, I've been putting up with him for years and years, so I'm more patient than anyone else, the fallen one said, looking at her with calm but tired eyes. I would have beaten him by now, the Gremory heiress nodded firmly at her own words. One punch is not enough for him, and so the three women began to chat and become friends, which made Surziches sweat. He thought that Akeno's pervert was bad enough, but now with the first one who fell for lust, his little sister might become a pervert too. Now that everyone's had a chance to share their thoughts, I'd like to continue. I was saying that people don't possess chakra, but that doesn't mean they're weak. I can personally attest that, compared to them and you, they could eliminate you with minimal effort. I've observed some of their weapons, and most of them are easily capable of destroying one of your villages with a single attack if they tried. He revealed, surprising them. I was right, they're stronger than us, Kakashi muttered, looking somewhat warily at the otherworlders. From the moment they arrived, he couldn't feel any of the power of these beings. It was only the pressure each of them had exerted, which was far more than they felt with any cage or enemy. I don't think they're too far behind me, Sasuke said, clenching his fist a couple of times to try and work out if they were much further ahead than him in terms of power. Instead of spending 3 years under Jiraiya's tutelage, I was actually discovering this new world. Meanwhile, my clone was acting in a way that was consistent with my previous behavior to maintain Jiraiya's trust. If I were to change my personality suddenly, it would certainly raise a few questions. Over the 3 years, I spent most of my time getting to know the world and tidying up the vault where I found the Vamana. But this machine is only a small part of the wealth stored there. In fact, the riches of the vault are so vast that they would make all your daimyos look like mere peasants. The Vamana alone is worth more than the total value of your daimyos combined. How is that possible? Tsunade asked, surprised that the machine, regardless of its cost, could be worth so much. She wasn't the only one in her astonishment. I still don't believe that, Tsunade nodded, agreeing with her current counterpart who was in disbelief. I'm not sure how wealthy these daimyo are, but if the Vamana is made of pure gold, it's actually worth a lot more than you could ever see in your lifetime, Ajuka said to clarify. Ajuka said to clear up the doubt about the cost of the ship, but if it is pure gold, it would be impossible for it to float. Akeno tilted his head, trying to figure out how something made of pure gold could float so easily. Azazel piped up, suggesting a possible explanation for why Vamana could float. You might be wondering how that's possible. I'm guessing you thought the color was just a cosmetic feature. He tapped the armrest with his knuckles. You're wrong. It's real, 24-karat gold, and those green plates you see there are emeralds. I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that I possess enough wealth to make your daimyo look like nothing more than a spoiled child next to me. He slowly lowered the Vamana until it hovered only a few feet above the ground. Wow, that's a lot. Riaz was amazed at the number of carats and emeralds. It was a fortune. It must be well crafted for the amount of material to make it look refined and not too heavy. Seraphil agreed with herself. And just one of those emeralds could solve the lives of entire generations of humans, Surziches said, impressed by the new information. Kel, for his part, sighed, seeing that neither of them showed the greed of any being at the prospect of having so much in their hands. He relaxed a little more and continued to watch the screen. One brave shinobi started making a series of hand signals, showing how frustrated he was at their continued taunting. He then unleashed a fireball using the Kaiten Kankakik no Jutsu technique. The observers were surprised when, instead of dodging the attack, which they knew he was capable of doing, Naruto stayed still, his expression unchanged. The fireball exploded when it hit the device. That was a bad decision, Michael said, shaking his head at the shinobi's foolish action. It was obvious that Naruto was in a completely different league and that individual had the nerve to attack him. It was just a stupid decision. I'll bet you 5 gold bars to kill him. Enemu made the bet with Riaz, who was tempted but also a bit nervous. If he won, he'd get 5 gold bars, which would be really useful for improving the finances of their shared territory. But if he lost, he'd have to pay those bars. Right now, he wasn't the most financially stable person. He decided to play it safe. No thanks, it's pretty obvious that guy won't make it, he replied politely to the fallen girl, who huffed and sat back down, all under the amused gaze of her boss, who laughed under his breath at how he failed to swindle a teenage girl. Naruto. Several Konoha shinobi called out, sounding concerned for his well-being. However, as the smoke cleared, they were surprised to see that he was uninjured. He was still smiling. Then, with more alacrity than anyone could have foreseen, the shinobi who had fired the fireball fell face first to the ground, dead. Even though it was obvious that it was going to happen, Gabriel couldn't help but look away from the scene because he didn't believe that the blonde would kill the man so easily. In one move, Azazel hissed in shock, I didn't see it coming. Seraphil rubbed his eyes, trying to figure out if it was his eyesight failing him or if the speed was too much even for them. You're not blind, I didn't see anything either, Surziches reassured his colleague, who had started to panic thinking she was already going blind. Oh, it's okay, the Leviathan calmed down after hearing that. I wonder if that's why Sona doesn't talk about her older sister, Riaz murmured to Akeno, who nodded in agreement. The Citriaris never spoke of her older sister, and now they could see why. But who were they to judge? They were girls who, when they had free time, locked themselves in each other's rooms to eat all sorts of things and watch anime in their pajamas all day. So, they had no right to judge. If you don't mind, I'd like to finish my story. I'd appreciate it if you refrained from further interruptions, he said, as if he hadn't just killed someone a few seconds ago. It was unsettling for everyone to see the cheerful, hyperactive boy act so nonchalantly as he killed. Even Sasuke had to blink, as if he couldn't believe the dope had killed someone. He couldn't be called that anymore. Maybe if he was still his old self, he could, but not this version of him. This version of Naruto was surprisingly detached, uncaring and ruthless, and showed a lack of regard for the act of killing. The corpse lying near him made this evident. It was to be expected. They knew the mask that reveals their true selves, so it's understandable that a change like this would shock them. They had a clear image of this person in their minds. Or a friend that they thought they knew perfectly. When the reality is revealed to them, their mind short circuits trying to process the new attitudes and actions that the individual is displaying. Azazel spoke as if he were a wise old man. While those who knew him knew he wasn't always to be taken seriously, there were times like these when his words were filled with painful reason. And the shinobi knew he was right. "How many things did you keep from us, Naruto?" Kakashi whispered, sounding sad. He wished he'd spoken to his student more as friends. The boy looked a lot like his teacher, which is why he'd never really chatted with him. It made him feel a bit down. He wished he'd spoken to him more. "I'll be quick, as I can't speak for more than a few minutes without being interrupted. The reason for the age discrepancy is that time moves faster in that alternate reality. While my clone and Jiraiya were gone for 3 years, I was actually there for 4, almost 5 years. This caused a discrepancy in my age, which is now 18, halfway to 19, instead of the expected 17. "That's interesting," Ajuka said, settling back in her seat. "Time is different in both worlds, and by a lot." The former leader was also interested in that, since he had been researching the different variants of what time is in different situations for a long time. And now, with this information, he realized that there are dimensions in which time passes more slowly and others in which it passes much faster. Enemu watched as the two scientists began to discuss their different points of view. "Men don't have much in the way of hobbies," Akeno nodded, agreeing. She never understood how men could find even something as simple as rock, paper, scissors interesting. "Sometimes I wish I was one," Riaz nodded along with the others, agreeing that it was interesting how even something insignificant could amuse them. Instead, they were stressed, struggling and so on, and the men always looked more relaxed than them. It was simply unfair. "It's time for me to go," he thought as he checked the time on his watch. "As nice as it's been, I've got to wrap up my time here." "Sorry, but I'm not sure I understand. Could you explain what you mean by that, Naruto?" Someone called out from behind him, stopping him from turning around to see who it was. It was a girl with platinum blonde hair tied back in a ponytail, looking at him with her hands on her hips. "What do you mean leave us? Don't you care about us, your classmates?" Ino asked. She noticed the rest of her colleagues were in agreement with her. "I suppose we were friends at one point. Now, though, I'd say you're just annoying." "Ouch, harsh words," Surziches said, grimacing slightly at Naruto's coldness and directness. "He's just straightforward and doesn't beat around the bush," Michael said, sighing as his little sister had told him that there was greed in those boys, so it was best for Naruto to stay away from them. The Namikaze family just watched in silence, unsure of what to say. They'd already been through this, and making derogatory comments about themselves to judge themselves would just tarnish their name even more. So they just watched. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. What did I say that was inappropriate?" Ino asked, hurt at being perceived that way. She noticed that the others were also looking hurt. "Yes sir. What do you mean?" "Of course we're your friends," she heard Kiba say loudly. Beside him, his dog Akamaru barked in agreement. She noticed that Shikamaru, the pineapple-haired boy, was watching the scene with a bored expression. It was clear that trying to reason with him would be a waste of time. Serafol nodded in agreement with the boy's attitude. It was better to understand, analyze and deal with the situation than to waste time arguing about something that's practically lost. That said a lot about his intellectual capacity. Konoha 12. He started the process of getting everyone's full attention. That was our team name back when Sasuke was still with us. After he left, it was renamed Konoha 11. He took a moment to look around the room. The current designation is Konoha 10. He then mentioned the tragic incident where Neji gave up his life to save it, along with his cousin. This made them both shudder at the memory. In the near future, it will be Konoha 9, as I no longer need the services of either of you. Take a moment to think about what you've done. You're not important to me, compared to the bigger picture. The only person here who can give me a run for my money is Sasuke." He looked at the dark-haired boy, who looked back at him. After a brief pause, he carried on. "Your skills are no match for mine, you're insignificant compared to me. You should know your place and understand that I won't put up with any deviation from it." Gabriel looked at the boy on the screen with a hint of reproach, empathizing with the sadness and frustration he could see and feel in the hearts of these boys. "It's simple. Rubbish should be put in its place," Sasuke said, though his words were harsh and arrogant. He still had some courtesy towards the angel who looked at him. "Your heart is dark," Gabriel said, shuddering after feeling this boy's heart. It was a dark place, full of resentment and hatred, but there was a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel. "Tch. Sasuke clicked his tongue in annoyance. He wanted to be respectful like his mother taught him to be in life. Why? For this girl to come along and tell him he was dark and that he'd only been nice. The boy replied with a smirk to Naruto's words. Naruto had just said that, apart from himself, no one else would really be a challenge for the blonde. However, he wasn't sure what the next step should be. He was keen to take on a competitive challenge with Naruto, the only person he felt he could really go up against. It was no longer a certainty that they would face off directly, both going all out. The blonde had just shown he had some new abilities that he didn't know about before. What's more, the flying contraption he was sitting in was still largely unknown. Apart from its speed, he didn't know what else it could do. He also didn't know what weaponry it had, except that it was just as fast as the weapon used to kill the shinobi that attacked him. He didn't have his Sharingan activated at the time, but this could be important in future confrontations, especially if combined with his radical personality. All these factors, Sasuke decided to take a wait-and-see approach for now. "You're smart," Surziches said, nodding at the boy's intelligent thought. "You need to know what your opponent is capable of before you plan or attempt anything against him." And this boy, Sasuke, had a good thought. If he pounced on Naruto with only what he knew, he could die in moments because he didn't know the new moves, armaments, powers, and thinking of the new Naruto. "Thank you." He wasn't sure if it was a compliment or not, but he still responded hesitantly to this man. They all shielded power to too great a degree when they arrived, but the ones that stood out were those with red, blonde, and black hair. They were the most relaxed, and if his senses didn't deceive him, they were the second most dangerous next to that blonde woman who was staring at the screen. So, he still had things to do in his world. If hanging out with these people would help him even a little bit, he would certainly do it. "What about us, Naruto?" The Bijuu's booming voice made everyone look in his direction. He was easy to spot because he was standing near the other two, with Kyuubi in their midst. "They're huge," Rias exclaimed, spitting out his water and looking wide-eyed at the large creatures on the other side of the screen. "Surely one of their claws is as long as I am." Seraphil said in the same manner, looking at the large and majestic beasts before them. Naruto gave the Biju a quizzical look in response to his question. "What's our next step?" Kyuubi inquired. "If it's bigger than me." Yasaka sweated a little in place, looking at the imposing figure of the mightiest Biju of them all. "I'm not sure. I understand that Minato still has the other half of you inside him, right?" The blonde guy nodded. "You might want to think about joining your other half. The other version of me had gained your trust based on misleading information. I'm the real deal. Well, it might seem like a good idea to have some peace and quiet, it's important to be realistic. Such an arrangement will probably become tedious. The other option is that I let you come with me, since the seal is still on me." He sent a little bit of chakra to the Shikifujin, which appeared in his stomach. It would be good to have some extra power as a backup. But he looked down at his hand, which still had the sun mark he'd gotten from the sage. He was actually surprised that it was still there, though it seemed to be slightly darker. "I can give you a full report on what I've been doing since you've been out of the loop on what's been going on." "So it's divided, huh?" Azazel looked at the Biju with a calculating gaze. "You ask me if it were complete, what would be its level of power and devastation?" He cupped his chin, trying to think about it. "The key question here is whether he's at the level of the Great Nether Office," Surziches asked. "It's an interesting one." "There's a chance," Ajuka said, adding her thoughts. "Big Red?" Tsunade inquired, intrigued. She rose from her seat and moved to stand closer to them, accompanied by Kakashi and Sasuke. However, Sasuke was irritated by the look Naruto's sister was giving him. "Big Red is one of the most powerful entities in our world, second only to the goddess of the sun and universe," Rias answered. She saw no problem in sharing that kind of information about her world. "I see." Both Kakashi and she nodded, surprised to discover an all-powerful being in their world. Their worlds were fascinatingly different. The Biju took a moment to think before answering. "I'll join you. The fact that you still have the sun's mark shows you're not as evil as you seem. Plus, I'm curious about what else there is to discover." He wasn't sure if he saw it right, but the big fox seemed to be smirking before he opened the seal, and the Biju disappeared in smoke, which was absorbed by the seal. "I'm curious, it looks like the seal that father used to keep the souls of the celestial dragons in the magic gears," Azazel said, analyzing Naruto's seal further. He'd only seen it for a second, but his memory had captured a permanent picture, so he could analyze the structure later. "And you?" he inquired of the Hachibi. "I'm going back to B." This surprised the others. "I've got used to B's scolding, and someone's got to make sure that the individual doesn't take any wrong action." The Eight Tails commented with a touch of humor. The other Biju talked it over, and then Matabi spoke up. "We're going to stay here and enjoy our newfound freedom while keeping things balanced." The feline Biju spoke in a feminine voice. "If that's what you want to do," he replied. "You say they're just chakra constructs, or am I mistaken?" Michael asked the shinobi, curious. They nodded in agreement. Yes, they're just power constructs, Kakashi said, sounding uncertain. No, they don't. They have a life of their own. If they were just made of power, they wouldn't be able to become conscious or speak as they are doing. The Archangel's words caused them to hesitate for a moment. Ultimately, it's just speculation since we don't know the basis on which they were built and created, Michael concluded calmly. Please, Naruto, think about it. We can start a family now. It's over. He appealed to his son. His words got some skepticism from the Uzumaki Namikaze family. I'd like to ask you to think again, Nai-san, Nami said. But hypocrites, Akeno frowned slightly. Those words were from selfish people who only saw their own happiness and were trying to dissuade Naruto to assuage the guilt they carried with them. Akeno, they're listening to you, Rias told his queen, who just snorted. I don't care, tell them what a bad family they are. His words only made Minato and Kushina feel sadder and Nami angrier. How dare you, she was about to launch herself at the black-haired girl until some restraints came out of her seat and immobilized her completely. I just ask that we avoid any disagreements or arguments in this room as they could get hurt, Kel said calmly, still seated and looking at the girl who glared at him. But he didn't care and turned back to the screen to continue watching. Naruto was pretty disgusted to hear the others begging him to stay and you could tell from his expression. I remember what it was like when I was a kid being taken from the orphanage. I was on my own and feeling scared. I had no one to turn to except the third Hokage. I asked a lot of questions about who my biological parents were and why they left me when the Kyuubi was involved. His words had a strong effect on his family. He told me that he couldn't give me any more details except to say that they'd died while defending the village against the Kyuubi attack and that they'd both been considered heroes. I came to realize that not knowing about your parents can be a source of pain for an orphan. Over time, I stopped wanting to know who my parents were. I accepted that my parents, whoever they were good people who gave their lives for their child. Later on, I got to meet you, Minato, through my seal. I found it intriguing, if I may say so. After spending some time inside, I noticed a different chakra signature, although it seemed familiar somehow. I was pretty surprised, to say the least. I was even more surprised than Naruto was when he first met you. My father was Namikaze Minato, the Yondaime Hokage of Konoha. I kept this information to myself at the time because I felt uneasy about it. Although I didn't speak to you directly, I sensed something unusual about your presence. At the time, I wasn't sure why, but your existence before this event might explain it. What a story, Penemu said, with an expressionless face. What was being explained to them was a complete blasphemy of what the boy experienced. His father was a village leader who abandoned him to his fate. That spoke very well of the man. A fragment of power in a seal to be reunited at some specific point in his life. That's an interesting way to ruin the image of someone who thought of you as someone to look up to, Ajuka said, sounding a bit incredulous at the older Namikaze's actions. I wonder, does he hate them? Was Seraphal's million-dollar question. I'd say yes. The simple fact that he was left to his own devices must be a trigger for the hatred he might feel for them, Surziches replied to her friend, who nodded. Gabriel had a different take on this. Minato looked down as his son spoke. Then there's you. He turned to the Retiid standing next to Minato. Kushina Uzumaki, also known as the red-blooded Havanese of the Leaf. Wife of Minato Namikaze and my mother, although this is up for debate since I practically grew up alone. But I am your mother. She exclaimed, only to be silenced when his blood-red eyes landed on her. Come on, kid, finish her off like you did your father. Azazel laughed like a cartoon villain as he rubbed his hands together malevolently. You need to see a psychologist. Surely your old age is getting to you, Penemu said, sounding quite sharp. The fallen man stopped laughing and stood quietly watching the screen. No, he's just coming to terms with the fact that he's getting older, Penemu said, shrugging indifferently, which made the two teenagers sweat a little. You say you're my mother? I'd appreciate it if you could let me know where you were when I needed someone to talk to. On my birthday, I was left without a single message of congratulations. I was so upset that I cried myself to sleep. Kushina, I'd like to know where you were at the times I mentioned. I know where you were at the time in question. Otherwise, you were busy with your husband and your sister, who could have done more. Isn't that right, Kushina? You never once checked in on me, your own son. How can you call yourself a mother when you abandoned your own son? How can you call yourself Uzumaki when you were known for never abandoning your own? She asked him. I'm amazed at how well he speaks, Seraphil said, impressed by the boy's ability to communicate effectively. He knew how to choose the right words, how to say them, and when to say them. His mother once told him. Words are power. Learn from your opponent and finish him off with dialogue. That'll be the most humiliating defeat he'll suffer. That's what her mother told her when she was younger, and it's always been at the back of her mind, but she's never used it because war is more about strategy and power. And in those times, there wasn't a second to waste investigating someone. And those same words her mother said to her little sister Sona, who was more focused than her. So she was glad that her mother had a peaceful time to give lessons to her beloved little sister. After getting to know Naruto better, Gabriel realized that he felt resentment and sadness, rather than hatred, towards them. He decided to keep this to himself until he was completely sure. The silence that followed was thick and heavy, with no one wanting to speak. Each of them visibly shuddered as they listened to Naruto. With his words, he had transformed Kushina Uzumaki, a role model to many, into a troubled person. Realizing he'd let his anger get the better of him, Naruto took a deep breath to calm down. He then looked at her, and his anger was replaced by disgust as he observed her whimpering form, held up by her father and sister. Well done. Keeping a cool head and in control of your emotions isn't easy. Ijuka nodded, impressed by how the boy managed to keep his emotions in check and avoid any conflict. Remember, Ria's, a cool, calculated, strategic, and well-controlled mind and emotions will always win over a mind full of itself, arrogant and explosive, Surziches lectured his sister, who nodded in surprise. Her brother didn't often give serious advice, but when he did, she knew she should pay attention, given his greater age and experience. He might be her brother and a bit of a goofball, but at the end of the day, he was also her leader. She couldn't afford to treat him with less respect in front of two leaders from the other factions. I really need to get going. Staying here any longer is going to have a negative impact on my health. He got back into his seat on the throne and started to move again, only to stop once more due to another interruption. What? He exclaimed, visibly annoyed, as he turned to look at the person who had interrupted him. He was about to end the meeting and leave, but decided to listen to who it was. As Azul massaged his temples while still holding a glass of tequila or whiskey, no one really knew what the fallen man was drinking. Enemu made his choice and his leader nodded in agreement. I agree, but this guy is too unpredictable to decide if he's going to kill everyone and leave, the fallen leader said, taking another drink. Where did you get the alcohol? Michael asked, looking a bit disapproving. Gabriel was still very young, and from the look on his face, it was clear that he was curious about why his wayward brother was drinking and enjoying it so much. That little guy over there, he said, pointing to Kel, who was watching them with curious eyes. He gave it to me after I asked him to please, he shrugged, and they all turned to look at the green-haired man. If you guys are hungry or just want something, you can ask me for it, as long as it's polite and non-aggressive, he told them. They nodded. And I'm afraid I can't bring your son, Namikaze-san, as he's off limits to me, he told the familiar Namikaze, having heard her thoughts on asking him to bring Naruto to them. Are you out of your depth? Kakashi inquired of the youngster, his curiosity piqued. Yes, you see, I may be a simple guide for you, but my creator has granted me certain powers, but to a certain extent, limited. It would be impossible for me to bring a person who is far beyond my own capabilities and power. Hell explained why, which made everyone nod and Kushina just feel disappointed. She noticed a young woman approaching with dark blue hair, almost black in color, reaching halfway down her back. She was wearing a green bulletproof vest and black trousers with bandages on her calves and black sandals. The most striking feature was her lavender eyes, which seemed to stare at her with a look he had seen before in someone else. He recognized her as the Hyuga heiress, the same girl who had stalked his former self when they were younger. Naruto-kun, Hinata said, stopping and looking up at him. Please let me come with you. She stared at him, her eyes imploring. What? There were lots of exclamations throughout the camp as they realized what she'd said. No one had expected her to say those words. They knew she had feelings for him, but that was the old version of him. Hadn't she heard him insult each and every one of them? Oh, last-minute drama, Ria squealed like a schoolgirl in love. She had seen several series where the main character leaves and their lover asks to go away with them so they can be happy, and this was something similar. President, Akeno whispered in her ear. What's up, Akeno? The Gremory heiress asked her queen and friend, who was looking at her with an amused expression. Everyone's watching her, she giggled as the reteed turned as red as her hair. Riaz looked around and saw that people were looking at her in a curious and amused way. This made her blush even more and she sat down, trying to avoid all the stares. Everyone had a little laugh at the teenager's antics, apart from a fox-tailed blonde who was grinding her teeth in her seat and shooting a withering glare at the screen. Hinata, what are you doing? Her partner, Kiba, asked, looking at her in bewilderment. Enemu said, in a rather theatrical way, that she was asking to leave with her loved one. This made the others sweat, and even the shinobi had a faint chuckle on their faces. But her comment only made the yokai leader more annoyed. The girl lowered her gaze slightly before she composed herself. "I'm sorry, Kiba-kun, but it's my decision," she said to the boy, who looked like he wanted to retort but was stopped by his third partner, Shino, who shook his head at her. He then nodded to Hinata, who gave him a smile before turning her attention back to Naruto. She saw that he didn't like to be kept waiting. With a renewed determination, she stared into his blood-red eyes. "Naruto-kun, please take me with you. I've loved you since we were young," she finally admitted. She'd had those feelings since he saved her when they were younger. "Love?" he inquired. "Do you love me?" She nodded. Azazel enjoyed the word love as he swirled his drink to cool it faster. He then called for everyone's attention to pay attention to him. The word love has a lot of weight from ages past. It's when you tell the person you love everything you feel, when you open yourself to them in mind, body and soul. You hope that the person you say "I love you" to will return the same words and you'll be happy forever. While he was speaking, he had everyone's attention, looking at the screen and focusing on the eyes of the girl with pearly eyes. But her words are false and empty. He didn't finish his speech, though, because he wanted to wait and see how the situation developed. However, he seemed amused. "Please explain how you can confess to love me when our only meaningful conversation took place only a few hours ago. Give me an explanation, since you have never shown your affection as you claim," he inquired, raising an eyebrow. "That's interesting," Seraphil said, tilting her head. "You say you love him, but you never showed it. It's an interesting perspective. Because we're similar in some ways. We were both on the fringe of society. You by our village and me by my family. My family didn't think much of me because I was too gentle. They said I wasn't suited to the role of Hyuga clan heiress and that I should take a more ruthless approach. I was seen as a failure. I was taken aback by those words and felt inclined to abandon the endeavor." He then told the group the story in more detail. Meanwhile, Hiashi looked away, feeling a bit embarrassed as he listened to his daughter speak. He knew he'd been a bit harsh with his eldest daughter, but he wasn't fully aware of the extent of the impact his words had on her. "However, you gave me the strength to keep going. I saw you being treated differently and avoided by everyone as if you were a contagious disease. Instead of getting angry, you kept a positive attitude and acted as if nothing had happened. Seeing how strong you were in the face of similar challenges inspired me to try to be more like you. Despite the pressure from others, I was motivated to keep going and to keep trying to succeed." She finished her story, waiting for his response. Enemu let out a big sigh. She was clearly disappointed by those words. "She's a really pathetic woman," she continued as she growled, "God, how she disliked women like that girl." "Why do you say that?" Riaz asked her new colleague carefully. "Let me see how the boy reacts and I'll tell you everything," the woman said to the teenager, who nodded. "At that moment," she replied. She replied with a laugh. Her laughter started off soft but grew in volume as she threw her head back and kept laughing. Hinata wasn't sure what he was going to do next. She'd expected him to come down and take her with him or admit that he had feelings for her. Instead, she stayed in her flying contraption, which started to sway from left to right as her laughter echoed throughout the battlefield. Everyone was looking at Naruto, from Genin to Kage, from Missing Nin to Biju, as he acted as if he'd just heard a joke. "This is interesting. I'd like to see how you handle this kind of situation." Azazel crossed his fingers in front of his face and looked at the boy with a glint in his eyes. In this reading viewing, he had been shown how this boy solved situations that would have been complicated for anyone else. She was curious to see how he would handle the situation if it were to become romantic. Enemu moved further away from her boss and sat closer to both teenage girls, who were happy to welcome her into their little group. They wanted to talk to that other girl who was with Naruto's parents, but she was very hostile and they didn't want to fight. So they saw nothing wrong with having someone who had some interesting things to tell them as a companion. "You seem to think you understand my pain, Hyuga Hinata. I must disagree." His voice was firm and his gaze intense. Hinata was surprised by the sudden change in his demeanor, as were the others by how quickly his mood changed. "Hi," she replied, although she was still unsure. "That's not a great answer, girl," Ajuka said, shaking her head. She knew it was time to find another victim to help the boy out with his intellectual tongue so she could end her target. "I hope he's soft. She's a girl who loves him," Gabriel said, hoping against hope that he'd be able to discern some emotion in this girl's heart. Maybe, Michael didn't want to dash his little sister's illusions if he told her the truth. Misaka's eyes were wide and intense as she stared at the screen and held the sleeping little girl. In response, Naruto told the Vimana to descend until it hovered just above the ground. The other shinobi around him stepped back until only he and Hinata remained standing before him. She tried to maintain her confident attitude, but the more his red eyes looked at her, the more uncomfortable she felt. "I like it," Akeno bit his thumbnail lightly, looking at the blonde with clear desire in his eyes. "Akeno, please," Riaz complained to her friend. "It's just that, President, you don't understand what it's like to be dominated by his gaze alone," she teased, watching her turn red. "You do know," Penemu nodded approvingly, which made her smile even wider. "It's not fair to compare your pain and suffering with mine, Hyuga Hinata. I have to ask why you're making that comparison," he said firmly, her attitude changing as the air at her back started to move. "It's not right to suggest that my experience is the same as yours. While I was facing a lot of hostility in the village, you were enjoying the benefits of being a member of the respected Hyuga clan." He made a teasing comment, which made her wince. "I had nowhere to turn. Do you understand?" She was on her own. "By contrast, you, Miss Hyuga, had the full support of an entire clan. I was left without the support of the person responsible for my care, while you had the benefit of parental guidance and the continued support of your family. I wonder what I have to show for it. I was abandoned in a village inhabited by narrow-minded individuals. It seems my parents thought I was a burden and could not contribute to their community. I was left to my own devices in an environment that was not conducive to my growth and development." "He's really harsh with his words," Seraful commented, shaking her head. It was clear that the boy wasn't tempted by even a fiber of his being when it came to verbally humiliating people like that. "It's not that. He's just pointing out the harsh reality to someone who's so infatuated they think they have feelings for someone," Surziches told her friend. And Tsunade and Kakashi realized that the man was right. Hinata never really approached Naruto to talk or get to know him, so it was illogical and stupid for the girl to fall in love with him. As he spoke, weapons started to emerge from behind him. They were a variety of weapons, such as swords, spears, axes and halberds, and there were more and more as he shook. The variety of weapons was impressive. "Is it really going to kill her?" Gabriel asked, sounding a bit incredulous. He didn't sense the same level of malevolence and emotional intensity he felt in Sasuke. But seeing him kill a girl so casually and without a second thought was a bit shocking. "I'd advise you not to pretend to empathize with my situation, Hyuga Hinata, as it's clear you don't understand it at all. If you think you do, you're more naive than I thought." As he finished his remarks, Hinata was seen to be standing. Her eyes were red-rimmed and she dropped to her knees, overcome with emotion. He looked around and saw that the other shinobi, all with kunai at the ready, were watching beside him. He wasn't sure how this had come about, but in his anger, he had unknowingly activated the Gate of Babylon and ordered the weapons to return before closing the gate itself, causing them to let their guard down slightly. That's when you realize that the person you said I love you to doesn't feel the same way you do and never will. That's why love is a double-edged sword. If you are reciprocated as you had imagined, you are happy until you die or until the love is extinguished. But if you don't feel the same way, you can end up feeling really low. In some cases, this can even lead to suicide. It doesn't matter that you didn't really love that person. You've created false feelings and thoughts, which hurt as if they were real. Azazel resumed his old speech again, making him look like a wise old man as he held his drink. It was clear that the girl wasn't in love with him. Her feelings were just false illusions created by her lack of trust. After all, if her own family despised her and pushed her aside, she was looking for something to hold on to, something to stop her sinking into her own misery. She found an anchor in the boy and her mind came up with false feelings and hopes to keep her going. But in the end, the boy she used as a lifesaver never noticed her. The man who had fallen finished speaking and everyone was silent as they understood the depth of Hinata's case. "How did you come to that?" Penemu asked his boss, curious. "Deductions, and above all, the eyes. The eyes are the window to the soul," the fallen leader shrugged. "What's up with you guys?" he asked, noticing the looks on the faces of the remaining rookies. "I'm not sure how you could treat Hinata like this. It was wrong of you to do that. I don't have anything else to say on the matter for now. I want to make it clear that I have no feelings for her and never have and never will. It seems you're still unaware that I'm not the same Naruto you knew. Did you expect me to accept her feelings and reciprocate them like some sort of dog?" "That's the end of it," Azazel said, seeing how the obsessed girl was mentally and sentimentally shattered after those simple words from the boy. "I don't understand how you enjoy the suffering of others," Gabriel said, looking at him with reproach and some anger at how insensitive the fallen man was. Gabriel. I am a fallen angel for a reason. I have seen things that angels refuse to see, and I have learned a lot from it," he replied to the archangel, who frowned at him. "Cut it out, Azazel," Michael said firmly. The fallen angel just raised his hands in surrender as he laughed. "You know I'm right, Michael," he said. The leader of heaven knew it was true, but he didn't want his little sister, the purest of angels, to start questioning things. So he simply decided to keep silent, sending stern looks to the drinker. There was no reply, so she decided to put a stop to it. She wouldn't tolerate any more interruptions, as the longer she wasted time, the less chance he had of leaving. "I'm done here." You won't see me again unless I decide to come back, and the next person who interrupts will be dismissed. He told them as he ordered the Vimana to rise, not stopping until it was a few hundred feet above them. Realizing what his son had said, Minato, in a last-ditch effort, threw a three-pronged kunai with all his might against the hovering airship. The kunai whizzed through the air and, just as it was about to hit the airship, Naruto and the Vimana disappeared. There was no trace or sound left, as Naruto had traveled at speeds impossible to match. It's not logical to try to catch up with someone in a vehicle that's proven to be extremely fast, Ajuka said, shaking her head at the senior Namikaze's risky move. Some people are stubborn, Ajuka-chan, Serafal said to his colleague and friend, who nodded in agreement. He had dealt with a variety of individuals during the war, and in every platoon, there was always someone who was reckless, stubborn, and foolish. So this is when it's supposed to come to our world, Surzicha said, scratching his chin as he stared at Naruto's old place. I guess so, his little sister replied, looking at the screen as well. My neck hurts. I'd like a massage from Grafia right now. Do you like her massages? Surzicha turned pale at his sister's words. Yes, in fact, later when we have sleepovers, she gives Akeno and I a massage to relieve back pain. She has very soft hands, and then we fall asleep. Why? The teenager explained, curious about her brother's question. No reason, he said, laughing nervously and turning to the screen with tears running down his cheeks. Then why is she massaging me like she wants to kill me? He grumbled to himself, clenching his fist. He remembered the times his queen had almost broken his neck in her soothing massages. For a moment, everyone was silent, looking at the space he had once occupied. Some were still having trouble accepting what had just happened. They couldn't believe that the man they had seen leaving was the same as the carefree blonde who had saved the world. He watched his colleague leave with a frown. He was less surprised than the others. He'd sensed that Naruto was hiding something when they were on Turtle Island. When he came to take control of his Biju, he boy's cheerful demeanor was a front for his distress, which they could see when he lashed out at his mother and the Hyuga girl. His words were infused with enough anger and hatred to enrage one of the best kunoichi to the point of tears, and he did so with apparent ease. So be new. Kakashi let out a sigh. Even someone from another village had noticed his student's facade, and he hadn't. He always told his students to look underneath. It's clear that this man is a full Jinchuriki, and his Biju is his friend. He'd tell him if something was wrong with one of his brothers or his jailer, Sasuke told him with a flat, disinterested face. This made them wonder how many people had noticed and if they were the only ones who hadn't noticed. He's gone. I can't sense my counterpart anymore. Minato heard the Kyuubi inside him speak, which made him refocus his attention. He looked at Sasuke, who shook his head, indicating that he couldn't sense him either, even with the mark they shared. At that moment, he became aware of a new situation. His son, Naruto, was no longer there. The boy he and Kushina had previously ignored was gone from their world, potentially forever. He was overwhelmed with emotion as he wept with his wife and daughter, who were also grieving the loss of their brother. Now they're sorry and want to play the victims. What hypocrites, Akeno said, without beating around the bush. He really disliked that family. To abandon a child to his fate, knowing he'd suffer, and still have the gall to come back and act like nothing happened. That was selfish. Riaz didn't intervene when her friend spoke up because she knew she was right. Hinata was seen being comforted by the other rookies nearby. They seemed surprised at how strongly they were reacting to the girl. Kiba, in particular, said he wanted to confront Naruto and demand an apology. However, his comments were met with indifference. As if he could stand up to the boy, Penemu shook his head, thinking it was impossible that the dog-like boy could give Naruto even a slight scratch. Sometimes they just get full of themselves thinking they're invincible, his boss said, shrugging and continuing to watch. Sasuke regarded the Namikazes with a degree of disdain. He was taken aback when he saw the yellow flash appear on the battlefield. He was even more surprised when the man introduced himself as Naruto's father, even though everyone knew that Naruto was an orphan. He looked away and watched as Hinata was comforted by her former companions. She was taken aback when she heard Naruto turn down the girl. It's not quite right to say he rejected her. The girl seemed to be in a state of mental distress, staring off into the distance as the others tried to get her attention. When they were younger, he rejected Sakura with a simple no or HN in response to her requests. However, this rejection of Hinata was more like an annihilation of her personality than a simple refusal. It was necessary. A weak woman who depends on others hurts the reputation of strong women who work hard to gain recognition, Yasaka said calmly, but she was smiling triumphantly inside. So you had one too, huh? Penemu said, with a hint of mockery in his voice, to the boy with dark features, who simply snorted and refused to answer the question. Surzicha let out a tired sigh. Back in his younger days, there were plenty of female fans of his and his friends. They were always the first to die on the front lines of battle because they were more interested in keeping themselves pretty than in training. I suppose it's just one of nature's little quirks, Kakashi said, earning a nod from the retreat. He noticed Sakura watching him from the side. Her green eyes met his with a certain longing. However, he didn't stop and spun on his heels to activate his Susanoo and take flight, leaving her to follow him with a frown. There was nothing she could do now. He'd hoped to engage Naruto in combat, but that opportunity was gone. There was little more she could do. He could apologize for his important contribution to the victory, but what then? Without Naruto to challenge him, his options were limited. He figured Sakura would probably keep asking him out on dates and other social stuff since she hadn't fully recovered from her assassination attempt. This made him wonder about his mental stability since it was hard to imagine staying in love with someone who tried to kill you multiple times. However, there was Naruto, who was determined to rescue him. It should be noted that this version of Naruto was an invention. The original iteration of Naruto had moved on. Michael tried to show respect by saying, "You have no idea," but Tsunade, who had been drinking sake, replied with a hiccup in her words. Another drunk Riaz noticed the woman drinking and commented, "Her assistant never lets her drink without finishing her paperwork, so now she's taking advantage." Kakashi explained calmly, thinking about what Shizune would say if she went to her leader now. Enemu growled at Azazel, who flinched a little. It was true that he was avoiding his duties and preferred to drink or relax, leaving the work to his assistant. But now he was revealing himself to him, and that was not ideal. If he was already strong, she didn't want to know how he would do if he was given the ideas of an empowered woman. Just thinking about it, she shuddered in her seat and had another sip of whiskey. Sakura wasn't the only one keeping an eye on Sasuke as he left. Kakashi, Sasuke's second in command, also watched his student's departure with a noticeable sadness in his eyes. Watching Sasuke leave, Kakashi realized he hadn't done a good job as a mentor. He hadn't supported his team members enough, especially Sasuke and now Naruto, who was his sensei's son. Sasuke's behavior was to be expected, but Naruto's actions and deceit surprised him. However, he watched his sensei, who was still holding the tearful forms of his wife and daughter. He wasn't the only one to blame for Naruto's behavior. Maybe if his sensei had been more of a father to him, Naruto would still be here and he'd still be the same Naruto they'd all grown to love. He laughed as he could almost imagine Naruto shouting happily at them after defeating the Jubi. Shouting that he was one step closer to becoming Hokage and joking with Sasuke. A teacher who feels regret for his students, Ajuka said quietly, watching the silver-haired man feel guilty about most things and even holding some of that guilt towards the real culprits. "I was even willing to leave him in charge," Tsunade muttered, looking at the screen with droopy eyes, remembering the blonde. She hadn't wanted to admit it, but since the incident and in the war, Naruto had shown her that he was more than capable of taking on the role of Hokage. He had the power, but he lacked experience, which was what had stopped her from handing over the position to him. And now she couldn't because he was no longer there. They say you never know what you have until it's gone, and they all lost it. He went over to Tsunade, thinking about what she'd do next now that Naruto was gone. Minato looked up from where he was sitting and saw his remaining student making his way towards him. He tried to start a conversation, but the student just carried on without greeting him or his family. Namikaze Minato noticed that other shinobi, who had previously been really enthusiastic about seeing him, now seemed to ignore him. Some people looked at Minato Namikaze and his family with disdain, shaking their heads. They were shocked that the esteemed Hokage had arranged his own demise and, moreover, abandoned his own son. This was not the same Minato Namikaze they knew. The man before them was nothing more than a former hero. It's a way to ruin everything in your image, basically. It ruins your existence by losing the respect they had for you for being a good warrior because of a bad choice, Surziches said, shaking his head. He'd seen situations like this many times before and it was always because of the same thing. If you make the wrong choices, people will lose respect for you. You'll just be left with a shadow of your former self, tormenting you for eternity. They heard a soft, gentle murmur, and as they watched, they could see the little girl in the blonde fox's arms begin to stir in the woman's lap. "Yes, sweetheart?" Yusaka inquired gently, observing her young daughter rise in her lap and rub her eyes. "Where are we?" she asked, recalling that she'd been in her room with her mother. She'd been reading a book and had fallen asleep, and now that she woke up, she was in a strange place. "Let me help you, Miss Yusaka," Kel said kindly as he approached the girl, who looked at him with curiosity. If her mother did nothing to stop him, she could trust him. She felt the small hands of the being in front of her pass on either side of her head, and slowly information came to her mind, making her eyes light up. "Great, you were looking at a fabulous hero." The little girl giggled lightly into Yusaka's lap, who laughed softly at her daughter's energy before looking at Kel with a questioning look. "Relax, I didn't tell her who he is. She just knows he's a very strong and cool hero." "She'll figure it out herself," came the little green-haired boy's voice in her head, making her feel a little wary. Everyone watched with a faint smile at the girl's cheerful and bubbly attitude, although she looked at them from time to time with slight caution and suspicion. Rather than looking threatening, she was adorable with her little fox ears and tails. In the sky above the Pacific Ocean, ripples formed in the air. Naruto emerged from them, still seated on the Vimana, seemingly indifferent to the cold air beating against his chest. "Interesting," he commented as he looked out across the vast expanse of ocean in all directions. He immediately engaged the cloaking mechanism to avoid detection by any radar system. When the man she was told was a great and powerful man appeared, the girl's eyes widened and tears began to form in the corners of her eyes. The girl quickly got up from her mother's lap and ran to the screen, hitting it while crying, "Daddy, Daddy, Mommy, Daddy's there, get him out." She kept hitting the screen with her little hands, begging her mother in tears. Isaka felt her heart ache at the sight of her little girl like this. She missed her father so much, and seeing him on the other side of a screen was too much for her. So she just slowly approached her daughter, while the girl kept crying and asking for her father to be taken off the screen. The woman just hugged her gently from behind and wrapped her tails around her. "Why isn't Daddy there, why isn't he with us?" the girl asked, tears streaming down her face, clinging to her mother, who also shed some tears, feeling her baby's deep sadness. "Hey, it'll be okay. Daddy will be back with us, just give him time and we'll have our family complete and united," she said quietly to her daughter, who was still sobbing, but nodded and clung to her mother's clothes. Everyone was confused about what had happened. The girl was excited to meet a fantastic hero, but now that he appeared, she burst into tears, asking or more like begging for her father to be taken off the screen. "Then Naruto has a daughter?" Kushina muttered in shock and disbelief at that. That girl was sure that Naruto was her father, but that had to be impossible. He would have introduced them to her, wouldn't he? He's strong, dominant, sexy, and now he's a father. "I think I fell in love," Akeno said playfully, smacking his lips at the image of Naruto and then at the little girl who was sobbing into Yasaka's robes, who was already in her place. "Akeno, watch your language," Rias told her, a little embarrassed by the crude words of his queen, who let out a giggle. But in general, everyone was pretty much in the same boat, still struggling to get their heads around the idea that he was Yasaka's father. The holographic representation of destiny appeared before him, confirming his arrival. The Vimana then proceeded to navigate the route autonomously. He enjoyed the sensation of the wind blowing through his blonde hair as he remained in a state of repose with his eyes closed. The journey was completed with remarkable speed and he opened his eyes to contemplate Japan. Azazel muttered, noticing that the boy had made his way into his world as if it were nothing, having torn through space-time and reality itself to cross from side to side. "So, if that immense pressure we felt was due to him," Michael said, looking at the screen, "what on earth could he have planned to do in our world?" "We need to proceed with caution," Surziches stated, and they nodded in agreement. They knew the boy was powerful, so they had to proceed with caution now that they knew he was in their world. Naruto strolled through the streets of Kyoto. His hands were in his pockets and his hood covered his face as he ignored the looks the women gave him, visibly embarrassed as they gazed at his bare chest. He wore a small smile on his face. "Oh, he's a bit of a flirt," Akeno chuckled as he watched the boy's toned chest and the way he walked around without worrying about them judging his appearance. "Lagartonas," Yasaka muttered with a frown as he watched these women, staring hungrily at his man. "You'll see when you come back, my love," he whispered darkly as he stared at the blonde. They all moved back a little in their seats as the yokai leader began to give off a bit of a malicious vibe. But they said nothing and kept watching the screen because they didn't want the woman to take it out on them. Her smile wasn't mocking or amused, it was warm and welcoming. She carried on walking towards her destination, then stopped and looked ahead. "Her smile," Gabriel said quietly. It didn't seem like a bad or unkind smile. It was more welcoming and friendly, like a brotherly smile. It was the love of a father seeing his son. And to see such a beautiful emotion rule the boy's now calm heart made his eyes water. He noticed a little girl, about 3 or 4 years old, sitting on a swing with her head down. She was wearing a custom-made Maiko outfit and a necklace from which hung a green gem, which he recognized as the one Tsunade had given him when he had come to find her. He thought she was one of the few people there that he could tolerate. Naruto couldn't see the girl's face because she was looking down. He could see her eyes, hidden under her hood, for a moment and they were golden, which meant she was feeling something. He frowned. He could see that the girl was sad as she shifted her weight on the swing, trying to move. "If she is his daughter," Tsunade whispered in shock, "that necklace is special." She told Naruto so when she handed it to him after their bet. "It's the necklace of the first Hokage, a treasure given to a special person." She gave it to her boyfriend and brother and then passed it on to Naruto, who she saw as her younger brother or grandson. Seeing him give possession of that necklace to the girl only confirmed her words. He's her father, Kakashi nodded, understanding what the large-breasted woman was thinking. He also knew what the necklace meant, and seeing that the girl was wearing it was confirmation of everything. I have a granddaughter, am I a grandmother? Kushina's eyes filled with tears at that. How long had she been asking that question? How much of her son's life had she missed? She had the answers right in front of her, in the form of the fox girl they claimed was Naruto's daughter. Minato was in the same situation as his wife. They lost their son, who hates them, and they also lost the chance to even know he was a father. It was a huge regret for both of them. She closed her eyes and focused on the necklace she was wearing, which gave off a soft glow that caught the young woman's attention. She took hold of the necklace in her hand and raised her head, allowing her own eyes, which were shining like gold with a hint of red, to see the man standing not far from her. She started to cry, then got up and went over to the man. The necklace the girl had in the room also glowed, which only made her cry even more. Yes, it's him, it's daddy. She cried, even more into her mother's chest, who snuggled up to her and tried to soothe her. That's right, sweetheart. That's your daddy, Yusaka said gently, rubbing her daughter's back as she sobbed. Let's not cry anymore, okay? I'm sure your father doesn't want to see you upset. She whispered softly, soothing the girl who looked up to see her eyes a little puffy from crying. She dried her eyes with the sleeve of her clothes and sat more comfortably on her mother's lap, who hugged her and kissed her on the head. Naruto watched the young woman approach, noting her pace as she got closer. He then proceeded to kneel down and adjust his hood, revealing his golden blonde hair and red eyes. The young woman was surprised to see him and exclaimed, "Atausen." Naruto smiled and held out his arms. "Yes, Kunu-chan. It's me, you're Atausen," he said in a calm and reassuring tone. Gabriel said his eyes were soft now. She understood everything. It was all a show so that the others would stay away from him and not bother him. The only thing that reigned in his heart was the love of a father for his son. It can be tough when a parent leaves, and it shows in the kids. But he came back to her, and the girl felt her world rebuilt by having her dad back, Ajuka said. He wasn't one for sentimentality, but he could tell the difference between how kids felt. "Atausen," Kunu said as she hugged him, her eyes filled with tears. Naruto gave her a comforting hug. He tried to reassure her, letting his aura envelop her and radiate warmth and security. He felt her relax in his embrace and heard her sneeze as he ran a hand through her hair. In response, Kunu let his fox ears and tails become visible. Her tails wrapped around him as she leaned into him, enjoying the feel of his hands rubbing her ears. We heard someone blowing their nose. It was Kosser, who had a handkerchief in her hand and was lightly knocking on the door. She just wanted her father back so that her sadness would fade away, the fallen man said, sniffling. This only made everyone look at him more, puzzled by his actions. He noticed their stares and simply asked. "And a man show feelings when that happens?" he said, a little offended at their amused looks. In the case of Penemu, who looked at him in embarrassment, he added, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you." "And is he the strongest fallen angel?" Riaz asked Penemu in a whisper. Penemu sighed wearily and said, sadly, yes. Her boss was sometimes a bit too flamboyant, even by her own standards. "Kunu has been missing you, Atausen," she said quietly into her jacket. He bowed his head slightly and kissed her between the ears, which twitched in response. "I've missed you too, Kunu-chan." Kunu looked a little sad and envious. It seemed like the Kunu on the screen had all the luck in the world to have her beloved father with her, hugging her. And that made her feel a bit envious of herself, she realized. She also wished for a hug from her father, hearing him say how much he loved her and that she was his favorite daughter. Next, she noticed that there was an important but familiar signature nearby, even though she was still in physical contact with her daughter, who seemed unaware of it. "Who are you and why are you interacting with my daughter?" he heard a female voice ask. She then threw a lot of kai in his direction. He responded with a soft chuckle, noting that Yusaka was as overprotective as ever. Kunu's trembling caught his attention, prompting him to release his own reassuring aura, which immediately made her stop shaking. "Yusaka-chan, how come you don't recognize your daughter's father?" Serafal teased her friend, who had a slight red tinge on her cheeks. And it was true, her partner was too good at hiding or making her signature power unrecognizable, so that must be why her counterpart hadn't realized who she was. "I have a question for you," Yusaka said, watching the person in front of her who held her daughter with narrowed eyes. She was surprised that Kunu had wrapped his tails around the person so quickly. He'd wasted no time in locating her as soon as some of his guards entered his office. They'd informed him that they'd seen an unknown person near his daughter who, despite not appearing to be so, was very powerful. His back was now turned to the unidentified blonde man holding his daughter. A protective mother, Michael nodded approvingly. She was the kind of mother that many humans should be, for on many occasions, and with all the pain in his heart, he had seen mothers let their daughters be touched or abused by cruel people. What bothered him most was seeing how his father's creations were slowly deteriorating and over the decades, more cruel people emerged. That's why, despite his position as a leader, he was upset when he saw those people engaging in such actions. He wouldn't let their souls into heaven because heaven was for people who regretted their actions. They didn't show any remorse, so he wouldn't let them into heaven. She gave a little chuckle, which made her squint. Did she find it funny? Before she could open her mouth, the person spoke. Have you forgotten about me already, Yusaka-chan? Yusaka gasped as she recognized his voice. Naruto-kun, is that you? She asked, ordering her security personnel to lower their weapons. Tears welled up in her eyes as she saw the figure turn around, revealing that it was Naruto, her Naruto. Kunu's father and his partner. His red eyes glowed with love, which she reciprocated with a soft smile as he held out his free arm. Akeno, this is like that love novel we saw, Ria said, her voice full of excitement at such a touching, love-filled scene. Her friend laughed slightly and nodded in agreement. She replied calmly, watching the Redeed's eyes sparkle with excitement at the knowledge that she could witness a real love scene between a couple who were meeting again. Your sister is quite emotional, isn't she? Ajuka said to Surziches, who sighed and nodded. Yes, she is, the Lucifer completed his friend's words and nodded. I know, he said, sighing again. That's why he was trying his best to end the engagement with the Phoenix heir. His little sister was too plump and still had her girlish innocence to marry a guy like Riser. She put the blame on her parents for being a bit reckless. Isaka moved quickly to approach both Naruto and his daughter. She felt his arm around her waist. His security team lowered their weapons as they saw Yusaka press her face to his chest, hugging him and his daughter. I must say I'm surprised to see you here. She spoke softly, her words muffled by his jacket. I'm here to honor my commitment to you both, he replied as Yusaka leaned back slightly and looked into his eyes. Their eyes met, a golden and red hue reflecting the intensity of his gaze, until she noticed him for a split second. He never forgot his promise, Yusaka whispered, putting a hand on the donut where her heart was. She was crying as she saw her beloved return to her arms. It's okay, mummy. Daddy will be back, Kunu said, putting her hands on her mother's cheeks and wiping away the tears that were running down her face. I know, sweetheart, she said gently to her daughter, who hugged her back. I wish I could marry a man like that, Gabriel said wistfully. He would love her, respect her, and always take care of her. That would make her happier than she already was. Michael smiled at his sister's words, but he didn't say anything and just let her continue to fantasize. He could see that she was struggling, even though she was trying to hide it. His son was going through an emotional rough patch, the effects of the traumatic experience he had gone through the year before were showing. She leaned towards him and kissed him lightly on the lips, pleased to see him reciprocate her gesture after a second. Then she turned her attention to her daughter, her face pressed against his chest as she slept. That's interesting. There's a backstory, Serafal said, eager to find out if they would be given or told the story of the two of them. That guy, always getting into trouble with women, Sasuke snorted in amusement at how his friend now had a wife and daughter by his side. I always thought he'd stay with that actress Daimyo, he added, and Yusaka's sharp gaze glared at him. Sasuke felt a slight shiver run down his spine. Kakashi whispered in his student's ear and got a nod in reply. For his own safety and well-being, he should keep his mouth shut about the women who were interested in the blonde. Naruto-kun, are you okay? Yusaka asked, sounding concerned. Yes, why do you ask? He said, looking confused. Instead of answering, she put her hand up to his face, ran it across his cheek and showed him her finger. You're crying, she said, noticing the wetness on her finger. Wow, I didn't expect that, Azazel said, seeing that the boy had become sentimental. He was back with his wife and daughter. If he were in her position, he would also be crying with happiness. I wonder what's going to happen next, the former employee thought to himself, looking at the screen. Would the new guy get involved in the faction's mess, or would he stay out of it? His mind began to race with possible answers to these questions, but none of them were quite right. I'm happy to be here with you and Kunu. He took his hand away from hers to rub his eyes. She was concerned and took his hand. Let's get you inside, you look very tired. She dismissed her guards and led him to her residence. Naruto just followed her, smiling the whole time as he let her guide him. Riaz gasped in horror as she watched the screen turn off in the middle of the story. Now it was where the couple would go home, drop their daughter off in her room, then cuddle, saying how much they missed each other, then the kissing, the touching, and the best part of all, where they would make up for lost time in bed. Just thinking about it made her feel a bit faint as she imagined the handsome guy on top of the busty woman. And I'm the pervert, Akeno said, watching his chairwoman slump against the back of her seat, her eyes rolling and blood trickling down her nose. You have about 10 to 15 minutes to rest, use the restroom, or get something to eat, Cal told everyone as he pointed to two doors marked toilets for men and women, respectively. Some of them nodded and headed to the bathroom or got some food to chat with some of the others. Isaka was sitting in her seat with Kunu on her lap. She asked her little girl if she wanted some food. Her daughter nodded enthusiastically, so they both stood up and went to the table where there was food. "Excuse me," a voice behind them made them turn around and see who was calling them. When she did, Yusaka's gaze became sharp and dangerous, seeing the three people in front of her. "Do you need anything?" she asked, hiding her daughter behind her who clung to her kimono. "I wish I could meet you and my granddaughter," Kushina said, looking at the woman in an almost pleading tone. Isaka looked at her silently in response. "My goodness, sister, how can you handle all these different people? This is quite the challenge," Kel said, watching the whole interaction with a sigh. He really wished his sister was there with him, dealing with the teenage girls. They seemed easier to handle. End of chapter. What if Naruto become king has harem in high school DxD, and thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel and leave a like if you guys need the next part, comment down, and thanks for watching the video and see you guys in the next video.